The moment I stepped through my front door and heard unfamiliar humming from my kitchen, I knew something was deeply wrong. There, standing at my sink, my mother's antique farmhouse sink that I'd painstakingly restored, was my mother-in-law, Vivian Parker, scrubbing dishes like she owned the place. My house keys dangled from my frozen fingers as the realization hit me. This wasn't a surprise visit. The suitcases stacked in my hallway and the framed photos already displayed on my mantle told a different story. This was an invasion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rachel, sweetheart. Vivian turned, flashing that saccharine smile that never quite reached her eyes. Daniel said you'd be working late. I was just making myself useful. She gestured to the sink full of dishes that I'd intentionally left to soak. Special pottery from my mother's collection that required gentle handling. Before I could respond, Daniel emerged from the basement carrying what looked like more luggage. His face fell when he saw me standing in the doorway, deer-caught-in-headlights expression betraying his guilt. "You're home early," he said, as if that were the problem. "What's going on, Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I gestured to the suitcases and boxes that seemed to be multiplying in our entryway. Daniel set down the luggage he was carrying and approached me with the cautious demeanor of someone cornered. "Mom's landlord sold her building. They're converting everything to luxury condos, and she had nowhere to go. It's just temporary until she finds a new place." Temporary. The word hung in the air between us, hollow and unconvincing. "And you didn't think to discuss this with me first?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Vivian inserted herself between us, still wearing yellow rubber gloves that I'd never seen before. "Daniel knew you'd understand, dear. Family helps family in times of need. That's what Henry always said." The mention of Daniel's deceased father was deliberate, a familiar tactic that instantly made Daniel's shoulders slump with obligation. "Of course," I managed, though the words tasted bitter. "How long have you been here?" "Just since this morning," Daniel said quickly. "Since yesterday," Vivian corrected with a small laugh. "But I didn't want to disturb your work schedule, so I told Daniel not to mention it until you'd finished your deadline." My deadline had been 3 days ago. Daniel knew this. I excused myself, retreating to my home office, the sunroom my father had built for my mother when she started painting. It was my sanctuary now, filled with my graphic design equipment, and the faint scent of my mother's favorite jasmine plants that still thrived in the corner. I closed the door, leaning against it as I tried to process what was happening. Through the window, I could see my mother's rose garden, the early summer blooms just beginning to open. This house had been my childhood home, my inheritance, my last connection to parents taken too soon. And now Vivian Parker was washing dishes in my mother's sink. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Still on for coffee tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I typed back. "Need it more than ever." When I finally emerged from the sunroom, the smell of unfamiliar cooking filled the house, something with too much garlic that overwhelmed the subtle lavender sachets I kept in decorative bowls throughout the living room. "I hope you don't mind," Vivian said when I entered the kitchen. "I found some chicken in your freezer and thought I'd make my special cacciatore, Daniel's favorite." Daniel, now seated at the kitchen island that my father had built by hand, looked up with a smile that begged for approval. "Mom's cacciatore is amazing. You'll love it." But all I could focus on was how she'd rearranged my kitchen. Appliances moved, my careful organization system disrupted, spice jars regrouped by Vivian's own logic rather than the alphabetical system I maintained. "Where are the dishes I had soaking?" I asked, noticing the empty sink. "Oh, those old things? I put them away after giving them a proper cleaning. They were quite grimy." Vivian stirred her sauce with a wooden spoon I'd never seen before. "You really should use a dishwasher for everyday items, Rachel. Save the hand washing for special things. Those old things were my mother's hand-thrown pottery from her artist phase, irreplaceable pieces that required gentle handling. I bit my tongue and opened the cabinet where I kept them, finding them stacked haphazardly, one bowl bearing a chip that hadn't been there before. These need to be handled carefully, I said quietly, removing them from the cabinet. They were my mother's. Well, how was I supposed to know? Vivian replied with a dismissive wave. You really should label things that are so precious. Not everyone is a mind reader. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom didn't mean any harm, Rach. She was just trying to help. The familiar pattern was already establishing itself. Vivian would overstep, Daniel would defend her, and I would be cast as unreasonable for having boundaries. I'd seen this dance play out during holidays and brief visits, but the thought of it happening daily in my own home made my stomach clench. That night, as we prepared for bed, I tried once more to understand the situation. How long is temporary? Daniel? A week? A month? Daniel avoided my eyes as he changed into pajamas. She's looking at apartments, but you know how the rental market is right now. Maybe a couple of months max. 2 months? The timeline felt both specific and suspiciously extended. And this couldn't wait until we discussed it? What was there to discuss? Daniel's voice took on that defensive edge that appeared whenever his mother was the topic. She needed help. I helped. That's what family does. I'm your family too, I reminded him. This is my home, my space. Our home, he corrected. And it has 3 bedrooms. We're using 1. My mother is using 1. There's still a spare. What's the problem? The problem wasn't the number of bedrooms. The problem was waking up to find Vivian Parker had colonized my space without warning or permission. The problem was my husband seeing nothing wrong with that. I sighed, suddenly exhausted. Just tell me next time, before making decisions that affect both of us. Daniel nodded, but his expression suggested he still didn't understand my concerns. As he turned off the light, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long temporary would really be, and why Vivian hadn't simply stayed with Judith, her sister who lived just 30 minutes away in Springvale. The next morning, I woke to the sound of furniture being moved. I found Vivian in the living room, rearranging my carefully positioned seating arrangement. This layout makes much more sense for conversation, she explained, not pausing in her efforts. The way you had it? Everyone was staring at the wall instead of each other. The wall she referred to held my parents' wedding portrait and the abstract painting my mother had created during her final year. I'd arranged the furniture to highlight these meaningful pieces. I had it that way for a reason, I said, still fuzzy with sleep and disbelief. Well, this way is better for when I have my bridge club over. I blinked. Your bridge club? Just a few ladies from the community center. I've already made some friends in town, and they're eager to see where I'm living now. She beamed, as if this were something to celebrate. Don't worry, I told them not to come until after your work hours. Though really, Rachel, working from home must be so isolating. Wouldn't you be better off in a real office? Before I could respond to this or the presumptuous bridge club plans, my phone alarm reminded me of my coffee date with Megan. I'd never been more grateful for an excuse to leave my own house. The Copper Cup was busy with its usual morning crowd, but Megan had secured our favorite corner table. One look at my face and she set down her phone. Okay, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I slid into the chair opposite. Hurt! My mother-in-law has moved in, without warning. Yesterday, or the day before, depending on who you ask. Megan's eyebrows shot up. Vivian? The same Vivian who spent last Thanksgiving explaining how your stuffing recipe was brave and unconventional. The very same. Apparently, her apartment building is being converted to condos, and she had nowhere else to go. I made air. quotes around the words. Daniel didn't even discuss it with me first. I just came home and found her rearranging my kitchen. That's completely out of line, Megan said, her attorney instincts clearly engaged. Even if she did need a place to stay, your husband should have talked to you before inviting anyone to live in your home, especially someone with Vivian's boundary issues. I took a long sip of the latte Megan had already ordered for me, letting the caffeine bolster my fraying nerves. This morning, she was rearranging my living room furniture for her bridge club. She's been here one day, Megan. One day. What does Daniel say about all this? That I'm overreacting, that it's temporary, that she's family. I sighed. You know how he gets with her, like he's still 12 years old, desperate for her approval. Megan's eyes narrowed. And what about Judith? Isn't her sister nearby? Exactly what I was wondering, but I haven't had a chance to ask yet. I glanced at my watch. And now I have a client meeting in 30 minutes that I need to prepare for. How are you going to handle that with Hurricane Vivian redecorating your workspace? I hadn't considered this. My sunroom office was my livelihood. I conducted video calls with clients, created detailed design work, and needed both quiet and privacy. I'll have to establish some ground rules, I said, though, even as the words left my mouth, I doubted their effectiveness against Vivian's selective hearing. Document everything, Megan advised, her legal mind at work. Dates, disruptions, conversations. Michigan tenant laws might apply even in family situations like this. It won't come to that, I said quickly, though a part of me wasn't so sure. It's temporary, right? A few weeks, 2 months max. Megan's expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she nodded supportively. Right. Just be careful. Women like Vivian have a way of turning temporary into permanent when it suits them. When I returned home, Vivian was in my garden, pruning my mother's roses with kitchen shears. What are you doing? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I couldn't keep the horror from my voice as I watched her hack at the delicate stems. These were terribly overgrown, dear. Roses need discipline to thrive. She continued cutting, dropping decades-old growth onto a tarp at her feet. Henry always said my roses were the envy of the neighborhood. I gently but firmly took the shears from her hands. These roses are special. My mother cultivated them for years. Please don't touch them without asking me first. Vivian's expression hardened for just a moment before melting into wounded innocence. I was only trying to help. These bushes are clearly neglected. They're not neglected. They're heritage roses. They're supposed to have a wilder growth pattern. I gathered the cut stems, some still bearing unopened buds that would never bloom. Please just ask before changing things around here. Of course, dear. I didn't realize you were so particular. There it was. That subtle twist that made my reasonable boundary sound like a character flaw. Classic Vivian. Inside, I found Daniel in the kitchen, searching through cabinets. Have you seen the coffee maker? He asked without preamble. It's always on the counter by the fridge, I replied, watching his confusion with growing suspicion. It's not there now. Mom reorganized, a bit to make space for her food processor. I closed my eyes briefly, counting to 10. And where is my coffee maker? Daniel shrugged. Not sure. Mom said she put everything in more logical places. I'm sure it'll make sense once we get used to it. The casual we rankled, as if this unwanted reorganization was a joint decision we should both adapt to, rather than an invasion of my space. I have a client meeting in 15 minutes, Daniel. I need to set up in my office. No problem. Mom's watching her shows in the living room, so you'll have privacy. But when I entered my sunroom office, I discovered that privacy was a relative term. Vivian had moved a small side table and chair into the far corner. along with a basket of knitting and a stack of magazines. "Daniel," I called, trying to keep my voice level. When he appeared in the doorway, I gestured to the new additions. "Why is there furniture in my workspace?" He glanced at the setup with apparent confusion. "Oh, Mom mentioned the sunroom gets great light for her reading. I didn't think you'd mind sharing since you're only in here for meetings." "Only for meetings?" As if I didn't spend 8 hours a day working in this room that was now being treated as a communal space. "I work in here all day, Daniel. I need privacy for client calls and concentration for design work. This is my office." "It's just a small corner, Rach. There's plenty of room for both of you." I began to reply, then noticed the time on my computer. My client would be calling in 5 minutes. "We'll discuss this later," I said, gesturing for him to leave. "I have a meeting." As predicted, the client call was a disaster. Halfway through my presentation of logo concepts, Vivian entered without knocking, carrying a tray with tea. "Thought you might need refreshments," she announced loudly, placing the tray directly on top of my sketchpad. I muted myself quickly. "Vivian, I'm in a meeting." "I can see that, dear. Don't mind me." She proceeded to pour tea, the china cups clinking loudly. My client, visible on screen, watched this interruption with poorly concealed irritation. When I finally managed to usher Vivian out and return to the presentation, the momentum was broken. The client decided to think about the concepts and circle back, which in my experience usually preceded a cancellation. That evening I tried again to establish boundaries with both Daniel and Vivian over dinner. Dinner that Vivian had prepared without asking, replacing my planned meal with her own creation. "I need my office space to remain private during work." "Hours," I explained, trying to sound reasonable. "Client meetings are confidential, and interruptions affect my professional reputation." "I was only bringing you tea," Vivian sniffed. Most people would appreciate the gesture. "It's not about the tea. It's about entering without knocking during a video call." Daniel sighed. "Mom was just being thoughtful, Rachel. Maybe you could put a sign on the door or something when you're in meetings." The suggestion that I should adapt to Vivian's intrusions, rather than her respecting basic boundaries, was infuriating, but I swallowed my frustration. "Fine, I'll make a sign. But my workspace needs to remain my workspace. No reading nooks, no knitting stations." Vivian dabbed at her mouth with a napkin I'd never seen before. "You know, when I taught school, I shared an office with 3 other teachers. We managed just fine by being considerate of each other's needs. This isn't a school, Vivian. It's my home office where I run my business." "Our home," Daniel corrected automatically, and something inside me went very still. "Yes," I said, carefully, "our home, which is why major decisions like someone moving in should be made together." Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Vivian jumped in before he could respond. "Speaking of decisions, I noticed your guest room has such potential. With just a few changes, removing those old boxes and perhaps a new color on the walls, it could be a proper bedroom." The old boxes contained my parents' belongings that I was still gradually sorting through. Photographs, letters, mementos from their lives that I wasn't ready to part with. "Those are my parents' things," I said stiffly. "Yes, but they've been gone." "What, 4 years now?" Vivian's tone suggested this was more than enough time to have moved on. "Surely you don't need all those dusty old memories cluttering up a perfectly good room." Daniel, sensing danger, quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. The implication that my parents' memories were mere clutter to be disposed of for Vivian's comfort cut deep. That night, I lay awake listening to Daniel's steady breathing, beside me, feeling the first serious fracture in our marriage. It wasn't just Vivian's presence. It was Daniel's ready defense of her actions, his willingness to let her steamroll over my feelings and needs. "She's trying," he'd said when we went to bed. "She's adjusting too. Cut her some slack." But all the slack seemed to be one-sided, with expectations that I would bend while Vivian simply took what she wanted. 2 weeks into Vivian's temporary stay, the situation had deteriorated further. My client list had shrunk after 3 more interrupted meetings. My kitchen had been completely reorganized to Vivian's specifications. My garden bore the scars of her helpful pruning. And now, most alarmingly, there was a strange man in my basement taking measurements. "Who is this?" I asked, finding them amid the boxes of my parents' belongings, which had been pushed unceremoniously into corners. "Ah, Rachel," Vivian beamed, not a hint of guilt on her face. "This is Mr. Sampson. He's helping me explore options for making this space more livable." "Livable?" I repeated, looking from her to the contractor and back. "Well, since I'll be staying a bit longer than expected, we thought it might make sense to convert this area into a proper mother-in-law suite. That way, we'd all have our privacy." The casual "we" and the revelation of an extended stay hit me simultaneously. "Daniel agreed to this?" "He wants me to be comfortable," Vivian said smoothly. "And this way, I wouldn't need to impose on your main living space as much." I thanked Mr. Sampson and asked for a moment with my mother-in-law. Once he'd gone upstairs, I turned to Vivian. "You can't renovate my house without my permission." "Daniel's house too," she reminded me. "And he sees the sense in making proper use of this wasted space." "These are my parents' belongings, which you've had years to sort through. Rachel, dear, at some point, hanging on to the past becomes unhealthy. I'm concerned about you, truly." The faux concern was the final straw. "The contractor needs to leave. Now. And we need to have a family meeting about how long you're actually planning to stay." Vivian's expression shifted, the mask of maternal concern slipping to reveal something harder. "Daniel has already approved the initial plans. Perhaps you should discuss your concerns with him." I did exactly that the moment he arrived home from work. His defensive response told me everything I needed to know. "Mom found a great contractor who can do the work at a fraction of the normal cost," he explained, as if the issue was financial rather than fundamental. "And it would give everyone more space." "That's not the point, Daniel. The point is that decisions about renovating our home should be made together. And those boxes she wants to clear out contain your in-laws' belongings. People who welcomed you into their family, whose home you're now living in." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "I know, and I respect that. But Mom's right that it's been 4 years. Maybe it is time to go through those things, keep what's truly meaningful, and let the rest go. That should be my decision to make, not Vivian's, and not even yours." But even as we argued, I could see I was losing ground. Somehow, in just 2 weeks, Vivian had managed to position herself as a permanent fixture in our home, making plans that extended indefinitely into the future. That night, unable to sleep, I slipped downstairs to check on my parents' belongings, fearing Vivian might have already started sorting them without permission. In the dim light of the basement, I carefully opened boxes, confirming their contents remained undisturbed. It was while moving a box labeled Mom's Winter Clothes that I noticed something out of place. A large vintage suitcase I didn't recognize, partially hidden behind the water heater. Curious, I pulled it out, noting its expensive leather construction and worn travel stickers from locations around the world. The suitcase was locked, but the aged mechanism gave way with minimal effort. Inside, I found neatly organized folders and documents, property records, bank statements, and legal papers, all bearing Vivian's name alongside unfamiliar companies. Confused, I began reading, and as I did, the pieces started forming a disturbing picture. Contrary to her story of financial distress, Vivian appeared to own multiple properties that were being systematically liquidated, with the funds moving through various accounts. Among the papers was a real estate appraisal for my house, with notes about its potential market value and suggestions for improvements to maximize return. Another document detailed Michigan laws regarding property rights in cases of mental incompetence, with specific passages highlighted. Most disturbing of all was a letter from Judith, Vivian's sister, referencing their plan and suggesting that securing financial control would be easier than expected, given the husband's receptiveness. The husband, Daniel, my Daniel, who was apparently being manipulated as part of some scheme involving our home. My hands shook as I carefully photographed each document with my phone, making sure to return everything exactly as I'd found it. My mind raced with implications. Vivian hadn't lost her apartment. She had deliberately inserted herself into our home with some larger plan in mind. But why? What did she want with my modest inheritance? And how was Daniel involved? As I closed the suitcase and returned it to its hiding place, one thing became crystal clear. This was no longer about enduring an unwelcome houseguest. This was about protecting my home, my legacy, and possibly my marriage from a threat I was only beginning to understand. I climbed the stairs with new resolve, the weight of discovery heavy on my shoulders, but my mind suddenly, terribly clear. Vivian Parker had declared war on my life without my knowledge. Now that I knew, I could fight back, and fight I would with every resource at my disposal. The game had changed. Vivian wasn't just an overbearing mother-in-law, she was a calculated predator, and I had just found her playbook. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay beside Daniel, watching shadows play across the ceiling as my mind raced through the implications of what I'd discovered. The vintage suitcase hidden in my basement had transformed Vivian from an overbearing mother-in-law into something far more sinister, a calculated threat to everything I held dear. Morning arrived with the now familiar sound of Vivian humming in the kitchen. I dressed quickly, tucking my phone with its damning photographs into my pocket, rather than leaving it charging on the nightstand as usual. Daniel had already left, for an early meeting at the construction site, leaving me to face Vivian alone. "Good morning, dear," she greeted me with manufactured cheer, placing a plate of something that definitely wasn't my usual breakfast on the counter. I made my special cinnamon French toast. Daniel always said it was his favorite growing up. I forced a smile, accepting the plate while wondering if she'd noticed my midnight expedition to the basement. "Thank you, Vivian. That's very thoughtful." Playing along felt like swallowing glass, but I needed time to process what I'd found and determine my next steps. Vivian Parker was clearly executing some kind of plan involving my home, and confronting her prematurely would only drive those machinations underground. "I was thinking," Vivian said, settling across from me with her own plate, "the upstairs bathroom really needs updating. Those vintage tiles might have been charming once, but they're terribly impractical." Those impractical tiles were hand-painted Portuguese ceramics my mother had carefully selected during their 20th anniversary trip to Lisbon. They were irreplaceable. "They have sentimental value," I said carefully. Vivian waved away my concern with her fork. "Sentiment doesn't keep mildew from growing in grout, dear. Besides, a modern renovation would significantly increase the home's value." There it was again, her preoccupation with my home's market value, consistent with the appraisal documents I'd found in her suitcase. "I'm quite attached to them," I maintained, watching her expression tighten almost imperceptibly. "Well, we'll see what Daniel thinks. He always had a practical head on his shoulders, even as a boy, not overly sentimental." The implied contrast hung in the air between us. Throughout our marriage, Vivian had specialized in these subtle comparisons that positioned Daniel and me as fundamentally incompatible. He practical, me overly emotional. He focused, me scattered. He family-oriented, me selfishly independent. After breakfast, I retreated to my sunroom office, locking the door behind me, something I'd never felt the need to do before Vivian's arrival. I had 3 client meetings scheduled, but before those began, I needed to examine the evidence more carefully. I pulled out my phone and began reviewing the photographs I'd taken. The real estate appraisal was dated just 2 weeks before Vivian's appearance on our doorstep, not the desperate last-minute search for housing she'd claimed. Another document detailed property transfers from 3 different addresses, all formerly belonging to Vivian, all sold within the last year with the proceeds directed to offshore accounts. Most disturbing was a half-drafted letter to a neurologist in Vivian's handwriting, expressing concerns about my daughter-in-law's increasing paranoia and erratic behavior. The letter described fabricated incidents, mood swings, memory lapses, irrational outbursts, a fictional portrait of mental instability. My hands trembled as I set down the phone. Vivian wasn't just angling to stay in my home. She was methodically building a case that I was mentally unfit. But why? What could she possibly gain? A sharp knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Rachel, I need to speak with you." Vivian's voice, sharper than her usual saccharine tone. I quickly closed the photos on my phone and unlocked the door. Vivian stood there holding my laptop bag, her expression a mask of concern. "I found this downstairs by the basement door," she said, extending the bag toward me. "Were you working down there last night?" A test. She'd noticed the suitcase had been disturbed. "No," I replied, accepting the bag with what I hoped was a convincing look of confusion. "I was editing photos in bed last night. Maybe Daniel moved it?" Her eyes searched mine, looking for signs of deception. "Must have been. Well, do be careful with your equipment, dear. Creative types can be so absent-minded about practical matters." Another dig, another subtle undermining of my competence. But now I recognized these comments for what they truly were: deliberate efforts to create a narrative of my instability. "Thank you for bringing it up," I said with a deliberately vague smile. "I have a client meeting in 10 minutes, so—" Of course," she backed away, all solicitude now. "I'll make sure you're not disturbed." But 20 minutes into my video call with an important new client, the door swung open despite the meeting in progress sign I'd taped to it. Vivian entered carrying a tray with coffee and cookies, smiling broadly. "So sorry to interrupt," she announced to both me and my visibly startled client on screen. "But Rachel sometimes forgets to eat when she's working. Mother-in-law to the rescue." She set down the tray directly in front of my camera, obscuring my face from view. "Vivian, we're in the middle of—" "Don't mind me," she continued, adjusting items on my desk. "Mr. Richardson next door mentioned you were working with his daughter's company. Such a small world. I was just telling him this morning how concerned we all are about Rachel's workload. Such pressure she puts on herself, sometimes forgetting appointments." My client, who happened to be Tom Richardson's daughter, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should reschedule, Rachel. It seems like you have family matters to attend to." "That's not necessary," I began, but Vivian was already speaking over me. What a thoughtful suggestion. Rachel has been so scattered lately. A fresh start tomorrow would be best. After my client disconnected with promises to touch base later, I turned to Vivian, no longer bothering to hide my anger. "You just cost me a contract worth thousands of dollars." Vivian's expression was all innocent surprise. "I was helping, dear, and introducing myself to the neighbors is just good manners." "You told Tom Richardson I was forgetting appointments? Why would you say that when it isn't true?" "Oh, did I say that? I meant you've been working so hard. It would be understandable if things occasionally slipped your mind. No one thinks less of you for it. But someone would think less of me. Clients who heard rumors about my unreliability, neighbors who were told I was scattered, contacts who found their communications mysteriously unanswered. I was being systematically discredited, and I could now see the deliberate hand behind these accidents. That afternoon, I escaped to the Copper Cup to meet Megan, bringing my laptop and phone. Away from Vivian's watchful presence, I showed her the photographs of the documents I'd discovered. "This is—" Megan's legal mind worked visibly as she processed the evidence. This is incredibly concerning, Rachel. These aren't the actions of someone who needs temporary housing. This looks like a coordinated effort to gain control of your assets. But why? I pushed my untouched coffee aside. My house is valuable, sure, especially with the lakefront property, but it's hardly a mansion. Why would Vivian go to these lengths? Megan scrolled through more photos, stopping at one showing financial statements. 3 properties liquidated in the past year, with declining sale values. Heavy withdrawal patterns consistent with gambling losses. References to collection agencies. She looked up at me. Rachel, I think Vivian may be in serious financial trouble. The kind that makes your mortgage-free home look very appealing. But she can't just take my house, I protested. No, but if Daniel were to assume control, say if you were deemed temporarily unfit to manage your affairs. The pieces clicked together with nauseating clarity. The carefully documented concerns about my mental state, the disruptive behaviors that undermined my business and social standing, the efforts to isolate me from clients and friends. She's setting me up, I whispered, making me look unstable so Daniel can take control of the house. And if her pattern holds, Megan continued grimly, once legal control passes to Daniel, she'll convince him to liquidate the asset, sell the house, likely to address whatever financial hole she's dug herself into. Daniel wouldn't do that, I insisted, though doubt crept into my voice. He knows what this house means to me. Megan's expression was sympathetic but firm. The same Daniel who let his mother move in without consulting you? Who defends her inappropriate behavior? Who's apparently been discussing home renovations with contractors behind your back? Put that way, my confidence in my husband wavered. Daniel had always been susceptible to his mother's influence, eager for her approval in a way that spoke of old wounds and conditional love. If Vivian convinced him that selling the house was for my own good, framed as concern for my mental health, would he resist? I need to talk to him, I decided. Show him what I've found. Be careful, Megan cautioned. If Vivian realizes you're onto her, she might accelerate her plans or destroy evidence. And if Daniel is already compromised, the implication hung heavily between us. If Daniel was actively colluding with his mother, confronting him would only alert them both that I'd discovered their scheme. I need to know where he stands, I said finally. Tonight, when Vivian's at her bridge club, I'll show him everything. But fate had other plans. When I returned home, the house was unusually quiet. No Vivian in the kitchen or living room. No sound of Daniel's arrival from work. Instead, I found a note on the counter in Vivian's flowing script. Daniel complained of a headache after lunch. Picked him up from work and took him to Dr. Martin for a checkup. Don't worry, dear. Back later. Leftovers in fridge. V. Dr. Martin. A name I didn't recognize. Not Daniel's regular physician, Dr. Patel, whom I'd have been notified about, automatically as his emergency contact. A cold feeling spread through my chest as I called Daniel's cell phone. Straight to voicemail. Next, I tried his office. Parker Construction. This is Jeff. Hi, Jeff. It's Rachel. Is Daniel available? A pause. Daniel left early today. His mother came by around noon. Said there was some kind of family emergency. Is everything okay? Family emergency. Not a headache. Everything's fine, I managed. Just a miscommunication. Did she say where they were going? Something about a doctor's appointment, I think? Daniel seemed pretty concerned. I thanked him and hung up, my unease growing by the minute. Why? Would Vivian lie about why they left? Why take Daniel to an unknown doctor? And why was his phone off? On impulse, I went to our bedroom and checked Daniel's nightstand drawer where he kept important documents. His passport was missing. So was his birth certificate. Items no one would need for a simple doctor's appointment, but which might be required for more significant legal matters. I called Megan again, my voice tight with urgency. Vivian's taken Daniel somewhere, and I think she's accelerating whatever she's planning. His important documents are gone. Where are you now? Megan asked, her voice shifting into crisis management mode. At home. Alone. Stay there. I'm coming over. And Rachel? Check your documents too. I nearly dropped the phone in my rush to get to the fireproof box in my closet where I kept my own essential papers. The box was there, but when I opened it, ice flooded my veins. My passport was still there, but my birth certificate was missing. So was the original deed to the house. And most alarmingly, the power of attorney document I'd signed years ago, giving Daniel authority to act on my behalf in case of emergency. When Megan arrived 30 minutes later, I'd already torn through the house looking for the missing documents without success. This is bad, she acknowledged, examining the half-empty document box. With your birth certificate and the deed, plus a power of attorney, they could be setting up for significant legal maneuvers. Like what? Property transfers? Financial control, especially if they're establishing some kind of competency concern. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. At urgent care with Mom. She fell at the store. Sorry for the confusion. Don't wait up. I showed Megan the message. He's lying. Jeff said Vivian picked Daniel up claiming a family emergency. Or Daniel's lying to Jeff, Megan pointed out. We don't know how involved he is in this. The thought that my husband might be actively participating in Vivian's schemes rather than merely enabling them hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. What do I do now? Go to the police? They'll think I'm paranoid. Exactly what Vivian wants them to think. Megan sat beside me, her attorney mind visibly working through options. We need more concrete evidence of their intentions, and we need to secure your position before they can undermine it further. She pulled out her laptop and began typing rapidly. First, we're documenting everything. The missing documents, the contradictory explanations, the pattern of behavior. Second, we're contacting my colleague who specializes in elder law and competency cases. Third, we're going to set up some protective measures for your assets. Elder law? I'm 34, Megan. The principles are the same. Protection from undue influence and financial exploitation. Mark specializes in cases where family members attempt to seize control of assets through manipulation. For the next 2 hours, we worked methodically, creating timelines, gathering evidence, and setting up legal safeguards. Megan helped me contact my bank to place alerts on any unusual activity and to require in-person verification for major transactions. We should check the mail, she suggested. If they're setting up financial maneuvers, there might be correspondence. The stack of mail on the entry table yielded nothing unusual until I noticed an envelope addressed to Daniel from Lakeside Psychiatric Associates. I don't recognize this practice, I said, showing Megan. Open it, she advised. At this point, all bets are off. Inside was a confirmation of an appointment for Rachel Parker scheduled for the following week, with forms for family-initiated evaluation, partially completed in what looked like Vivian's handwriting. They're setting up a psychiatric evaluation, Megan said grimly. Without your knowledge or consent. Can they do that? Legally, it's complicated. Ethically, absolutely not. But if Daniel claims you've been refusing help for concerning behavior... The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted. Her. Through the window, I could see Daniel helping Vivian from the passenger seat, her arm wrapped in what appeared to be a bandage. They're back, I whispered. And it looks like Vivian really did fall, or wants us to think she did. Megan gathered her things quickly. Remember, don't confront them directly yet. We need to understand exactly what they're planning before we show our hand. She slipped out the back door as Daniel and Vivian entered through the front. Vivian, leaning heavily on my husband's arm, her expression a perfect portrait of fragile suffering. Rachel, there you are, Daniel said, his voice unnaturally bright. Mom took a bad fall at the pharmacy, sprained wrist and some bruising. I forced a concerned expression. How did it happen? Just clumsy, Vivian said with a martyred smile. The doctor said I should rest for a few days. Such a nice young man, Dr. Martin. He wants to see you too, Rachel. Daniel mentioned your recent difficulties. My blood ran cold. What difficulties would those be? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Just the stress you've been under, with work and Mom moving in. Dr. Martin specializes in helping families through transitions. Families, not individuals. The phrasing was deliberate. How thoughtful, I managed, though I already have a doctor I'm happy with. Dr. Martin is more specialized, Vivian said, her eyes sharp despite her frail posture. And he's already familiar with our family situation. Our family situation. As if her machinations were a shared challenge we were all facing together. I'll think about it, I said noncommittally. You must be tired, Vivian. Can I get you anything? Just some tea, dear, and perhaps you could help me upstairs? Daniel has a meeting with Mr. Sampson about the basement renovations. I glanced at Daniel, who avoided my eyes. You're still going forward with that? After our discussion? It's just an estimate, he said defensively. Nothing's been decided. But the contractor's truck pulling into our driveway suggested otherwise. As I helped Vivian up the stairs, noting how her supposed injury seemed to pain her only when Daniel was watching, I felt the noose tightening around my life. In Vivian's room, formerly our guest room, now transformed with her furniture and decor, she settled onto the bed with a theatrical sigh. Such a trial, getting old, she lamented. One moment of inattention, and down you go. I poured her tea from the pot she kept on her nightstand, using the moment to scan the room for any sign of my missing documents. Nothing obvious, but a locked briefcase sat partially visible under the bed. Daniel seems worried about you, I said carefully, handing her the cup. He's always been such a sensitive boy. Too sensitive sometimes. She sipped her tea, watching me over the rim. It's why I worry about him, with all the strain he's under. Strain? Supporting a wife who's struggling, managing a business, now caring for his injured mother. It's a heavy burden for anyone, especially someone with Daniel's generous nature. The implication was clear. I was the source of Daniel's strain, not her. I was the problem that needed solving. We all have our burdens, I replied mildly. Speaking of which, I noticed some of my important documents seem to be missing. My birth certificate, some house papers. You haven't seen them, have you? Her expression never faltered. Why would I have seen your personal documents, dear? Perhaps you've misplaced them. Memory lapses can be quite concerning at any age. Another building block in her narrative of my instability. I'm sure they'll turn up, I said, matching her false brightness. Well, if you're comfortable, I should get back to work. Those deadlines won't meet themselves. As I turned to leave, Vivian's voice stopped me at the door. Rachel? Daniel mentioned you've been under financial pressure with some lost clients. If you need help managing the household accounts while you focus on rebuilding your business, I'd be happy to step in. I managed Henry's contracting company finances for 30 years. The offer to take control of our finances was so transparent I almost laughed. That's very kind, but we're managing fine. Of course, dear. Just remember the offer is there. Family supports family. Downstairs, I found Daniel and Mr. Sampson in deep discussion over blueprints spread across our dining table. They fell silent when I entered, exchanging glances that confirmed my suspicions. Rachel, Daniel began, his tone placating. We're just exploring options. I glanced at the blueprints. Detailed plans for not just a mother-in-law suite, but a complete reconfiguration of the lower level, including moving our laundry room and storage areas. These look quite developed for just exploring options, I observed. May I ask what the estimated cost would be for such extensive renovations? Mr. Sampson looked to Daniel, who nodded permission. Given the scope and quality Mrs. Parker has requested, we're looking at approximately $85,000. The amount was staggering, far more than we had available in savings, especially with my client base dwindling due to Vivian's interruptions. And how would we be financing this? I asked Daniel directly. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mom suggested we could take out a home equity line. The property has appreciated significantly since you inherited it. There it was, the first concrete step toward leveraging the house I'd sworn to protect. A debt against my parents' legacy that would give Vivian's scheme the foothold it needed. I see. I kept my voice neutral, conscious of the contractor's presence. We'll need to discuss this further in private. After showing Mr. Sampson out, I confronted Daniel in the kitchen, keeping my voice low to prevent Vivian from overhearing. $85,000, Daniel? Without consulting me? For a temporary guest? His defensive posture was immediate. Mom needs her own space if she's going to stay longer, and the injury complicates things. She can't be going up and down stairs with a sprained wrist. Stay longer? How much longer are we talking about? He avoided my eyes. Her lease situation is more complicated than we thought, and now with the medical bills. What medical bills? She was diagnosed with a sprained wrist at an urgent care center. That's a couple $100 at most. There are other concerns, he said vaguely. Things she's been dealing with privately. I took a steadying breath. Daniel, I found the appointment confirmation from Lakeside Psychiatric. Why are you scheduling mental health evaluations for me without my knowledge? His head snapped up, surprise and guilt flashing across his face before he composed himself. It's not what you think. Mom and I are worried about you. The mood swings, the paranoia about her taking over the house, the forgotten appointments. What forgotten appointments? I challenged. Name one time I've missed a scheduled commitment. The Peterson account, he said promptly. Mom said you were supposed to submit designs last week, but you never sent them. I stared at him, ice forming in my stomach. There is no Peterson account, Daniel. I've never heard that name in my life. Uncertainty flickered in his eyes. But Mom said, and there it was. The extent of Vivian's manipulation laid bare. She wasn't just undermining me to outside observers. She was actively feeding Daniel false information, creating a fictional narrative of my incompetence that he accepted without verification. Your mother is lying to you, I said quietly. And I think on some level, you know that. His expression hardened. You're the one acting irrationally, Rachel. Mom is trying to help us, help you, and all you do is resist and accuse. Help us by taking out an $85,000 loan against our home? Help me by scheduling psychiatric evaluations behind my back? How exactly is that helpful, Daniel? You need support, he insisted. Professional support. And if you won't seek it voluntarily. The threat hung in the air between us. If you won't seek it voluntarily, we'll force the issue. The we was particularly painful. Daniel and Vivian united against me, making decisions about my mental health, my home, my future. I think we need some space, I said finally. I'm going to stay with Megan for a few days while you consider what's really happening here. Panic flashed across his face. You can't just leave. Watch me. As I turned to go upstairs and pack, his next words froze me in place. If you leave now, it only proves what Mom's been saying about your stability. Do you really want to give her that ammunition? I turned back slowly, seeing my husband, the man I'd loved and trusted, in a new and terrible light. This wasn't just Daniel enabling his mother's manipulations. This was active participation in them, using my natural reactions against me, twisting my legitimate responses into symptoms of some invented disorder. "What happened to you?" I asked softly. "When did you become someone who would threaten his wife to please his mother?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about, Daniel? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're helping Vivian destroy everything I care about, including our marriage. You're overreacting. Another checkbox on Vivian's list of my supposed symptoms?" I laughed bitterly. "Let me guess. Paranoid, unstable, irrational. What's next? Delusional? Dangerous to myself or others?" The flash of recognition in his eyes told me I'd hit uncomfortably close to the language they'd been using. "We just want what's best for you," he said weakly. "No, you want what's best for Vivian. And for whatever reason, you've decided that matters more than what's best for me or for us." I turned away, unable to look at him any longer, and went upstairs to pack a bag. As I moved around our bedroom gathering essentials, the reality of my situation settled over me like a physical weight. My husband was compromised. My home was under siege. My reputation was being systematically dismantled. And the woman orchestrating it all sat just down the hall, no doubt listening to every word of our argument, calculating her next move. The familiar walls of my childhood, home, once a source of comfort and security, now felt like a trap closing around me. I needed to escape its confines to gain perspective and develop a strategy. But as Daniel had pointed out, leaving would only reinforce the narrative Vivian was creating. Stay and be slowly crushed beneath their manipulations, or leave and be labeled unstable for doing so. It was an impossible choice, deliberately constructed to leave me powerless either way. As I zipped my overnight bag, a text from Megan lit up my phone. "Whatever you do, don't leave the house. It plays into their hands. Coming over with reinforcements. Stall." I stared at the message, my escape plan crumbling. Megan was right. Leaving now would be walking straight into Vivian's trap. I needed to hold my ground, maintain my position in my own home, and wait for backup. Setting down my bag, I squared my shoulders and prepared to face whatever came next. The war for my home, my marriage, and my very autonomy had moved into a new phase. Vivian had made her move, revealing both her tactics and Daniel's allegiance. Now it was my turn to counter, and I would not go quietly into the night. I unpacked my overnight bag, hanging clothes back in the closet with deliberate calm despite the storm raging inside me. Downstairs, I could hear Daniel moving around in the kitchen, the occasional clink of dishes suggesting he was stress cleaning, a habit from childhood that emerged whenever he felt cornered. The house creaked and settled around us, familiar, sounds that now carried an undercurrent of threat. When the doorbell rang, the sudden noise felt like an electric shock in the tense atmosphere. I moved to the top of the stairs, watching as Daniel answered the door to find Megan standing there with my brother Jason behind her. "Rachel asked us to stop by," Megan said smoothly, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "Family dinner night, remember?" Daniel's confusion was evident. We had no such tradition, but he stepped back automatically, allowing them entry. Jason followed, carrying what looked like grocery bags, his usually relaxed demeanor replaced by watchful alertness. "Rachel didn't mention anything," Daniel said, glancing toward the stairs where he spotted me. "Did you invite them over?" I descended the stairs with more confidence than I felt. "I thought we could use some family time," I replied, embracing both Megan and Jason with perhaps more fervor than a routine visit warranted. "It's been too long." The silent message passed between us. Play along, follow my lead. Megan and Jason had understood the situation immediately, positioning themselves as witnesses and allies in what had become hostile territory. "Where's the famous mother-in-law we've been hearing so much about?" Jason asked, his tone carefully neutral despite the protectiveness evident in his stance. "Resting upstairs," Daniel answered. "She had a fall today." Megan's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication she recognized this as part of Vivian's manipulations. Nothing serious, I hope. Just a sprained wrist, I said before Daniel could elaborate further. Jason, why don't you help me in the kitchen? I'll show you where everything is. In the relative privacy of the kitchen, Jason set down the grocery bags and pulled me into a fierce hug. Megan told me what's happening, he whispered. I've got your back, Rach. Always. Tears pricked at my eyes, the first genuine show of support since this nightmare began threatening to unravel my carefully maintained composure. I blinked them back, focusing on unpacking the groceries, which I now saw included a bottle of wine specifically chosen because Daniel disliked it, ensuring he wouldn't partake and cloud his judgment further. We need to document everything, Jason continued in low tones as he helped me prepare a simple meal. Megan's bringing it up naturally, getting him to confirm details without realizing what she's doing. Sure enough, from the living room, I could hear Megan skillfully questioning Daniel about Vivian's accident, his responses becoming increasingly tangled as he tried to maintain the narrative they'd constructed. So she fell at the pharmacy, not the grocery store? And you were at work when it happened, not with her? No, I meant she called me from the pharmacy and I picked her up. But your text to Rachel said you were at the store with her when she fell. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted this gentle interrogation. Vivian descended slowly, one hand gripping the railing, the other held at an angle that inconsistently suggested pain. She froze midway down when she saw our unexpected visitors. Oh, I wasn't aware we were having company, she said, recovering quickly. I would have dressed for the occasion. She was, in fact, impeccably dressed in what appeared to be new loungewear, hardly the attire of someone who had been resting after an injury. Just an impromptu gathering, I explained, emerging from the kitchen. My brother Jason and my friend Megan from college. They wanted to check in on us after hearing about your fall. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly at my friend Megan, clearly, recognizing the name and calculating the risk represented by an attorney in her carefully controlled environment. How thoughtful, she said, completing her descent with a barely perceptible wince that seemed performative rather than genuine. Though I'm afraid I won't be much company this evening. The doctor gave me something for the pain that's made me quite drowsy. Don't worry about entertaining, Jason said cheerfully. We're just here to help out. Family supports family, right? The deliberate echo of Vivian's favorite phrase wasn't lost on her. Her smile tightened at the corners. How kind. I don't believe we've formally met, Jason. Rachel speaks so rarely of her family. The dig was typical Vivian, implying I was disconnected from my own relatives, further isolating me in her narrative. But Jason didn't take the bait. That's funny, because Rach calls me almost daily. Must be because we don't need to talk about what's already understood between siblings. He glanced meaningfully at Daniel. That unbreakable bond, you know? Dinner was a masterclass in strategic conversation. Megan and Jason tag-teamed, creating space for me to speak while subtly exposing inconsistencies in Daniel and Vivian's accounts. They drew out details about the basement renovation plans, the timeline of Vivian's arrival, the mysterious Dr. Martin. So this doctor isn't covered by your insurance? Megan asked innocently when Vivian mentioned additional appointments. Well, specialists rarely are fully covered, Vivian hedged. But he's not on your insurance panel at all? Megan pressed. That's unusual for urgent care referrals. Daniel jumped in. He came highly recommended by a friend of Mom's. Judith, I supplied. Your sister, right, Vivian? A flash of alarm crossed Vivian's face at the mention of her sister, the same sister who had written about their plan in the letter I'd found. Yes, Judith knows quality medical care when she sees it. She was a nurse for 40 years. Psychiatric nurse specifically, I added, watching comprehension dawn in Jason's eyes. The connection between Judith's profession and the fabricated mental health concerns suddenly becoming clear. How interesting, Megan commented. So she would understand the process for, say, involuntary psychiatric holds or competency evaluations. The air in the dining room seemed to crystallize with tension. Daniel's fork paused midway to his mouth. Vivian's smile became a brittle thing. "I don't see how that's relevant to anything," she said smoothly. "Just making conversation," Megan replied with equal smoothness. Professional backgrounds are always fascinating. As the meal progressed, I could see Vivian calculating, reassessing the situation now that outside observers had been introduced to her carefully controlled environment. Her performance became more pronounced, wincing when reaching for her water glass, sighing delicately when shifting in her chair. But beneath the frail facade, her eyes remained sharp, constantly evaluating. After dinner, while Vivian excused herself to rest her injured wrist, Megan deliberately engaged Daniel in conversation about his construction business, leaving Jason and me to clear the table. In the kitchen, under the cover of running water, Jason pulled a small object from his pocket. "USB voice recorder," he explained in a whisper. "It's been running since we arrived, and I put a nanny cam in my bag, which is sitting in your living room with a clear view of the main seating area." "Is that legal?" I whispered back. "In Michigan, you can record conversations you're a part of. As for video in your own home," he shrugged. "You have a right to security measures in your primary residence." My throat tightened with gratitude. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is just documentation. The real question is what our next move should be." I glanced toward the dining room, where Daniel was animatedly discussing a recent project with Megan, the most normal he'd seemed in weeks. Away from his mother's immediate influence, glimpses of my actual husband emerged from beneath the manipulated version Vivian had crafted. "I need to get through to Daniel somehow," I said. "Make him see what she's doing." Jason's expression turned grim. "And if you can't? Rach, you need to prepare for the possibility that he's too far under her influence." The thought felt like a physical pain, that I might not be able to reclaim not just my home, but my husband from Vivian's machinations. Before I could respond, the sound of something heavy falling came from upstairs, followed by Vivian's voice calling out in distress. "Daniel! Daniel, help!" Daniel bolted from his chair, taking the stairs two at a time with me close behind. We found Vivian on the floor, beside her bed, a fallen lamp beside her, clutching her supposedly injured wrist to her chest. "I got dizzy," she explained as Daniel helped her up. "The medication, I think. I was trying to adjust my pillows." Her gaze caught mine over Daniel's shoulder, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. There was calculation in those eyes, not pain. A cold assessment of how this performance was being received. "Let me help," I said, stepping forward to retrieve the lamp. As I bent down, I noticed something partially visible underneath the bedside table, the corner of what appeared to be my missing birth certificate, peeking out from beneath a stack of magazines. My breath caught, but I forced myself to continue, the motion naturally, setting the lamp back on the table while memorizing exactly where I'd seen the document. I would need to retrieve it later, when Vivian wasn't present. "Perhaps you should sleep downstairs tonight, Mom," Daniel was saying, "so you don't have to manage the stairs." "Oh, I couldn't impose on Rachel's space any further," Vivian demurred, though her tone clearly invited contradiction. "You could use my office," I suggested, surprising both of them. "The daybed in there folds out, and it's right near the bathroom." Daniel looked relieved at my apparent cooperation. Vivian looked suspicious. "That's very generous, dear, but I wouldn't want to disrupt your work area." "I insist," I said with a smile that matched her for insincerity. "Besides, I'll be working at the dining table tomorrow. I have an in-person meeting with the Richardsons' daughter about her project." The mention of actual, verifiable work commitments, especially with neighbors who could contradict Vivian's narrative about my supposed unreliability, caused a flicker of annoyance to cross her face. "Well, if you're sure." As Daniel helped Vivian gather what she'd need for the night, I slipped back downstairs where Megan and Jason were waiting with questioning looks. "She's fine," I said quietly. It was another performance. But I saw my birth certificate in her room. She's definitely been gathering my documents. "We need to search her room while she's downstairs," Megan decided. "Tonight, after they're asleep." The rest of the evening passed in careful navigation around Vivian, who was now installed in my office with the door conspicuously ajar, allowing her to monitor the living room. Jason and Megan stayed late, their presence a buffer against whatever Vivian might have planned next. When they finally left around 11, Jason squeezed my hand meaningfully. "Check your phone in 10 minutes, he whispered. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, a text arrived. "Cameras active. Voice activated in main rooms. Signal if you need immediate help." I showed Daniel the message discreetly. "Your brother installed security cameras without asking me," he demanded, though his voice remained low. "After what happened to Vivian today, he was concerned about safety," I lied smoothly. "Especially if she's staying downstairs now. Wouldn't you want to know if she fell again when no one was around? To help?" The logic was impeccable, appealing directly to Daniel's protective instincts regarding his mother. He subsided, though not without a lingering look of suspicion. "I suppose that makes sense." We prepared for bed in tense silence, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between us. As I lay beside Daniel in the darkness, listening to his breathing gradually even out into sleep, I mentally rehearsed what I would do next. Wait for deep sleep. Check on Vivian. Search her room. 2 hours later, I eased out of bed, checking to ensure Daniel remained asleep before slipping into the hallway. From downstairs, I could hear the soft sound of Vivian snoring, either genuinely asleep or performing yet again for any listening ears. Moving silently, I entered what had been our guest room and was now thoroughly Vivian's domain. The scent of her perfume hung heavily in the air, along with something medicinal that hadn't been present before. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight function on the lowest setting to navigate the unfamiliar arrangement of furniture. The stack of magazines still sat beside the bed, and beneath them, just as I'd glimpsed earlier, was my birth certificate. I carefully extracted it, confirming it was indeed the original. Encouraged by this success, I continued searching, methodically working through drawers and cabinets. In the closet, behind a row of Vivian's expensive clothes, I found a lockbox, similar to the one from which my documents had disappeared. It was secured with a simple combination lock. I tried Daniel's birthday. Nothing. Then Henry's, which I remembered from stories. Still nothing. On a hunch, I tried the day Vivian had arrived at our house. The lock clicked open. Inside, I found a trove of damning evidence. The original deed to my house, financial statements showing significant gambling debts to casinos in 3 states, collection notices, and most alarmingly, draft legal documents for a conservatorship proceeding, with me listed as the subject and Daniel as the proposed conservator. My hands trembled as I photographed each document, careful to return them exactly as I'd found them. The conservatorship papers were dated for filing just 1 week away, far sooner than I'd anticipated their plans coming to fruition. As I was replacing the last document, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. I froze, quickly closing the lockbox and sliding it back to its original position. The closet door began to open just as I pressed myself into the corner behind Vivian's hanging clothes. "Rachel?" Daniel's voice, thick with sleep and confusion. "Are you in here?" I held my breath, willing him not to search too thoroughly. After a moment, he closed the closet door and left the room. I waited several agonizing minutes before cautiously emerging from my hiding place. The hallway was clear, but as I crept toward our bedroom, I saw a light beneath the door of my office downstairs, where Vivian was supposedly sleeping. Voices drifted up the stairwell, too faint to distinguish words but clear enough to identify as Daniel and Vivian in conversation. Making a split-second decision, I moved to the top of the stairs, positioning myself where I could hear without being seen. "Found her birth certificate missing from the box," Daniel was saying. "She must suspect something." "Of course she suspects something," Vivian replied, her voice entirely free of the frailty she'd displayed all evening. "She's not stupid, just unstable. The question is whether she has proof." "This isn't right, Mom. All these secrets, these manipulations. I agreed to help because you said Rachel needed professional intervention. But this feels like something else entirely." A flicker of hope kindled in my chest at Daniel's words, the first evidence that he might not be entirely complicit in Vivian's schemes. "What it feels like is irrelevant," Vivian said sharply. "The facts remain the same. Rachel is increasingly paranoid, making accusations, alienating clients, and now sneaking around at night searching through my personal belongings. These are not the actions of a stable person. But a conservatorship? Taking legal control of her assets? That seems extreme. The house needs to be protected, Daniel, from her impulsive decisions and erratic management. You've seen how she neglects basic maintenance while spending on frivolous decorative projects. It's a significant asset that's being squandered." "It's her parents' home," Daniel said, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "They left it to her, not to us." "And what happens when her business fails completely because of her instability? When the mortgage can't be paid? Better to liquidate now, invest the proceeds properly, and secure both your futures." My heart pounded as Vivian's true intention was finally stated plainly: to force the sale of my home, my inheritance, my last connection to my parents. "I don't know." Daniel sounded torn. "Rachel loves this house. It would devastate her to lose it. Sometimes the people we love need protection from their own worst impulses," Vivian said, her voice taking on the practiced concern she'd perfected. "This isn't about taking something from Rachel. It's about securing everything for her, managing resources she's proven unable to manage herself. The psychiatric evaluation will confirm whether intervention is necessary," Daniel said, as if trying to convince himself. "Of course it will," Vivian agreed smoothly. "Dr. Martin is very experienced in these matters. Now, you should get back to bed before she realizes you're gone. And Daniel? Not a word about the conservatorship papers. She's not in a state to understand. This is for her own good." I retreated silently to our bedroom, slipping under the covers just minutes before Daniel returned. I feigned sleep as he settled beside me, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd overheard. The situation was worse than I'd feared. Vivian had orchestrated everything. Her fall, the mysterious doctor, the planned psychiatric evaluation, all leading to a legal proceeding that would strip me of control over my own home and finances. And while Daniel showed signs of doubt, he was still following her lead, still accepting her framing of me as unstable and in need of protection. Morning arrived after a night of fitful pretend sleep. I rose early, moving to the kitchen where I could text Megan and Jason without being observed. "Conservatorship papers in V's room. Dated for filing next week. Need to move fast." Megan's response was immediate. "Coming over with legal team at 9 a.m. Stall until then." I busied myself, making coffee, planning my approach. Direct confrontation would only reinforce their narrative of my paranoia. I needed to be strategic, to gather more evidence while appearing to be oblivious to their plans. Vivian emerged from my office looking remarkably spry for someone who had supposedly been injured and medicated the day before. Seeing me alone in the kitchen, her friendly mask slipped slightly. "Up early, aren't we? Trouble sleeping?" "Just excited about my meeting with the Richardsons today," I replied, matching her false brightness. Their daughter's project could lead to a whole series of new clients. Vivian's smile tightened. How lovely. Though I hope you're not overcommitting yourself. Stress can exacerbate certain conditions. What conditions would those be? Vivian? I asked innocently. She backpedaled smoothly. General wellness, dear. Everyone has limits, and you've seemed rather stretched lately. Daniel joined us, his expression guarded as he observed our interaction. The strain of his late-night conversation with Vivian showed in the shadows beneath his eyes, and in the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. Morning, he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. Any plans for today? Rachel has a meeting with the Richardson girl, Vivian supplied before I could answer. Though she might want to reschedule considering yesterday's little episode. Episode? I repeated, genuinely confused. When you disappeared for nearly an hour last night, Vivian explained with exaggerated patience. Daniel was quite concerned when he woke and found you gone. I met Daniel's eyes directly. I got up to get some water and checked the doors. I wasn't gone more than 10 minutes. The lie was deliberate, forcing Daniel to either contradict me and reveal he'd been searching for me, or accept my version of events and undermine Vivian's narrative. He hesitated, caught between truths. I might have been half asleep and misjudged the time. A small victory, but significant. Daniel had chosen not to support Vivian's exaggeration, creating the first crack in their united front. Vivian's expression flickered with annoyance before she recovered. Well, perception of time can be so subjective, especially at night. Speaking of which, I should call Dr. Martin to reschedule my follow-up. Judith mentioned he might have an opening for you as well, Rachel. That won't be necessary, I said firmly. I already have a physician I trust. But Dr. Martin specializes in family dynamics, Vivian persisted. He's helping us all adjust to this new living arrangement. I wasn't aware our living arrangement needed medical intervention, I replied, keeping my tone light despite the anger simmering beneath. Though speaking of arrangements, I've been meaning to ask, why didn't you stay with Judith after your lease situation changed? Doesn't she have plenty of room in that new house in Springvale? The question was calculated to expose the inconsistency in Vivian's story. If she truly needed emergency housing, her sister's home would have been the logical choice, not her son's house 2 hours away. Vivian's smile never wavered, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. Judith's spare room is being renovated. Such terrible timing, really. That is unfortunate, I agreed. When did her renovation start? I'm not sure of the exact date, Vivian hedged. Now, Daniel, will you be home for dinner tonight? I was thinking of making my special pot roast. The blatant topic change confirmed my suspicion. There was no renovation at Judith's house, just as there had been no emergency housing crisis. Vivian had manufactured the entire situation as a pretext to insert herself into our home. Daniel looked relieved at the shift. Away from controversial topics. I should be. No late meetings today. Perfect, Vivian beamed. Rachel, will you be joining us, or will your meeting run late? The question contained a subtle trap. If I said I'd be home, she could later claim I'd forgotten a commitment when I inevitably arrived on time. If I said I might be late, it would feed the narrative of my unreliability. I'll definitely be here, I said with certainty. My meeting ends at 4, and I should be home by 4:30. In fact, why don't we invite Megan and Jason again? They mentioned wanting to try your famous pot roast. Vivian's smile froze for just a fraction of a second. What a lovely idea, though I'm not sure I have enough ingredients for extra guests. Not to worry, I said cheerfully. I can pick up whatever you need on my way home. Just text me a list. With that exchange, the battle lines for the day were drawn. Vivian clearly wanted an evening alone with Daniel to continue cementing her influence. I was equally determined to maintain witnesses to her manipulations. After Daniel left for work, Vivian made a show of resting her injured wrist while making a series of hushed phone calls from my office. Using the small voice recorder Jason had left with me, I managed to capture fragments of her conversation, enough to confirm she was speaking with Judith about accelerating their plans. "She's becoming more suspicious," Vivian murmured into the phone. "We may need to move the timeline up. Yes, I know the risks, but waiting gives her time to counter." Daniel's wavering. "Dr. Martin thinks next Tuesday would work. The papers are ready. We just need the evaluation to support them." I documented everything, adding to the growing file of evidence against her. By the time 9 o'clock arrived, bringing Megan and her colleague Mark Stevens, a specialist in elder law and competency cases, I had compiled a damning collection of recordings, photographs, and notes. Vivian was visibly dismayed when I answered, the door to find not just Megan, but an obviously professional man carrying a briefcase. "Rachel, I thought you had that meeting with the Richardson girl?" Vivian called from the doorway of my office, her tone carefully modulated to express concern rather than the annoyance evident in her expression. "That's at 11, I explained. Megan and her colleague needed to drop off some paperwork for me to review beforehand. "Vivian Parker, this is Mark Stevens." Mark nodded politely. "Mrs. Parker, I've heard a great deal about you." Vivian's eyes narrowed as she assessed this new player in her carefully orchestrated game. "All good things, I hope." "That would depend entirely on your definition of good," Mark replied pleasantly. "Rachel, is there somewhere we could speak privately?" Vivian inserted herself into the conversation. "Rachel's office is currently indisposed, as you can see. Perhaps the kitchen would suffice." "Actually," I countered, "the dining room would be better for reviewing documents." I ushered Megan and Mark into the dining room, closing the pocket doors that separated it from the living room, and Vivian's curious ears. Once we were seated, Mark opened his briefcase and removed a file. "Based on what Megan has shared, and the evidence you've gathered, we're looking at a clear case of undue influence and attempted financial exploitation," he said without preamble. "The conservatorship papers you discovered are particularly concerning." "Can she actually do that?" I asked. "File for control of my assets based on fabricated mental health concerns?" "She can attempt it," Mark acknowledged. "And with a cooperative, doctor and your husband's participation, she might initially succeed. Michigan courts generally try to respect family concerns about competency. However," he added, seeing my expression fall, "we have significant countering evidence." He spread several documents on the table. "We've prepared an emergency injunction to prevent any competency proceedings from moving forward without independent evaluation. We've also filed a protective order regarding your financial assets, specifically the house, preventing any loans or liens from being placed against it, without your explicit consent." Relief washed through me. "So they can't take out that home equity line they were discussing?" "Not without your signature, your actual signature, not one Daniel might provide under a general power of attorney," Mark confirmed. "Speaking of which, we should revoke that power of attorney immediately and file the revocation with all relevant financial institutions." For the next hour, we worked through legal protections, signing documents, and developing a strategy for confronting Daniel and Vivian. Mark explained that while I had strong evidence of Vivian's manipulations, direct confrontation might still be risky. "The conservatorship filing is scheduled for next Tuesday, following your supposed psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Martin on Monday," he summarized. "Our best approach is to preempt both by having you undergo an independent psychiatric evaluation with a court-recognized expert tomorrow. That evaluation, combined with the evidence of manipulation, should effectively block their petition." "And if it doesn't?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "Then we counter-petition, presenting evidence that Vivian herself is exhibiting exploitative behavior and undue influence over your husband." The recordings of her discussing the plans to liquidate your home without your consent are particularly damning. A knock at the pocket doors interrupted our discussion. Vivian stood there, her expression a perfect blend of concern and confusion. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Daniel's on the phone. He says it's urgent. Something about your accounts being frozen." My heart sank. Vivian had clearly been listening and had already moved to counter our strategy. "Excuse me," I said to Megan and Mark, following Vivian to where my cell phone lay on the coffee table. I put it on speaker deliberately. "Daniel? What's going on?" "The bank called," Daniel said, his voice tense. "Our accounts have been locked pending some kind of fraud investigation. They mentioned unusual activity and a legal hold. Rachel, what did you do?" Before I could respond, Mark stepped into the living room. "Mr. Parker, my name is Mark Stevens. I'm an attorney specializing in financial exploitation cases. The hold on your accounts is a temporary protective measure while we sort out some concerning activity involving your mother's attempts to access those accounts." There was a beat of silence before Daniel responded, his voice tight with anger. "You went to a lawyer without talking to me first? Like you consulted me before letting your mother move in, or before scheduling psychiatric evaluations for me, or before planning to file for conservatorship over my assets?" The words burst out, months of frustration finally breaking through my careful restraint. Another silence, this one longer and heavier. "Who told you about the conservatorship?" "You did just now," I said quietly, though in truth I'd known from my discovery in Vivian's room. "Along with the evidence in your mother's possession, including the drafted legal papers scheduled for filing next week." Vivian's mask of concern slipped entirely, hardening into something cold and calculating. "Whatever Rachel claims to have found is clearly fabricated. Her paranoid delusions about my intentions have been escalating for weeks. This is exactly why medical intervention is necessary." "The only fabrication here is the story you've created about my mental state," I countered, turning to face her directly. "We have recordings, Vivian, of your conversations with Judith, of your discussion with Daniel last night about liquidating my home, of your calls to Dr. Martin arranging a predetermined diagnosis." Color drained from Vivian's face. "You've been spying on me? In my private conversations? Daniel, do you see how disturbed she's become?" But Daniel wasn't responding, the silence from the phone stretching uncomfortable seconds into a full minute. "Daniel?" Vivian prompted sharply. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow with realization. "The conservatorship wasn't your idea, was it, Mom? You told me Rachel's doctor had suggested it as a protective measure during her treatment. But there is no doctor, is there? Just like there was no emergency with your apartment." The ground was shifting beneath Vivian's carefully constructed narrative. She changed tactics swiftly. "Daniel, listen to me. Everything I've done has been for your benefit, for your future security. This house is a significant asset that's being wasted. Your father would have wanted—" "Don't," Daniel cut her off. "Don't bring Dad into this. He would never have approved of manipulating and gaslighting Rachel." "Gaslighting?" Vivian scoffed. Such dramatic language for sensible family planning. Mark stepped forward. "Mrs. Parker, I strongly advise you to stop speaking now. You're currently implicated in attempted financial exploitation, medical fraud, and potentially filing false reports. Any further statements will be documented and may be used in subsequent legal proceedings." The threat of legal consequences finally penetrated Vivian's composure. She sank onto the couch, the performance of frailty now genuinely reflecting her position. "I was trying to help," she insisted, though the words rang hollow even to my ears. Daniel's voice came through, the speaker addressing me directly for the first time. "Rachel, I didn't understand what was really happening. Mom said you needed help, that the conservatorship was temporary, just until you stabilized." She lied, I said simply. About everything. There was no apartment emergency, no concerned doctor, no mental health issues, just a calculated plan to take control of my house and sell it. The full weight of his mother's deception seemed to crush Daniel through the phone line. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, he said finally. "Don't let her leave." As the call ended, Vivian's demeanor changed entirely. Gone was any pretense of maternal concern or fragility. She sat rigidly on the couch, her eyes cold and assessing, as she evaluated this dramatic shift in her circumstances. "You've recorded private conversations," she said flatly. "That's illegal in many states." "Not in Michigan," Megan replied. "Single-party consent is all that's required here. And you violated my privacy by searching my room." "Your room?" I laughed without humor. "You mean the guest room in my house, where you were storing documents stolen from me. I think a judge will understand the distinction." Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. "Daniel will come to his senses. He always does. Blood is thicker than water, Rachel. Remember, thoughts and truth is stronger than manipulation," I countered. "Remember that." We sat in tense silence, waiting for Daniel's arrival. The revelation of Vivian's true nature hanging in the air between us like something physical and poisonous. The woman across from me was a stranger. Not the difficult, but ultimately well-meaning mother-in-law I'd tolerated for years, but a calculating predator who had nearly succeeded in destroying my life. The sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway broke the standoff. Footsteps on the porch, the door opening, and then he was standing in the living room, looking from his mother to me with new awareness in his eyes. "Let me see the conservatorship." "Papers," he said without preamble. I retrieved the copies of the conservatorship papers I'd printed earlier, handing them to Daniel without comment. His face darkened as he read through the document, particularly the sections detailing my supposed mental instability and financial irresponsibility. "This is nothing like what you described to me," he said finally, looking up at Vivian. "You said this was a temporary protective measure recommended by medical professionals. This is..." He searched for words. "This is a complete seizure of Rachel's assets and autonomy." Vivian's expression remained carefully composed. "The legal language is always more formal than the practical application, Daniel. It's standard procedure to request full authority and then exercise only what's necessary." "Don't lie to me," Daniel's voice took on an edge I'd rarely heard. "Not anymore. These papers describe Rachel as delusional and paranoid, incapable of managing her own affairs. They specifically authorize the liquidation of underutilized real estate assets, meaning this house. Which is a sensible financial decision," Vivian insisted, abandoning the pretense. "This house is too large for just the two of you, requires constant expensive maintenance, and represents capital that could be better invested elsewhere." "It's not your decision to make," I interjected. "This house belonged to my parents. It's my inheritance and my choice whether to keep it or sell it." "A choice you're making emotionally, not rationally," Vivian countered. "Daniel understands the practical considerations." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I understand that you manipulated me into betraying my wife. You fabricated concerns about Rachel's mental health. You staged that fall yesterday to make her seem uncaring. You've been systematically undermining her business and her reputation." His voice cracked slightly. "And I helped you do it." The admission hung in the air, painful but necessary. Mark Stevens cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to practical matters. "Mr. Parker, given what we now know, I believe the most appropriate immediate action is for your mother to find alternative accommodation while we sort through the legal implications of her actions." "You can't just throw me out," Vivian protested. "I have tenant rights." "Actually," Megan interjected, "you don't. Michigan requires 30 days of continuous residence to establish tenancy, and you've documented in your own correspondence that you've only been here for 22 days. Furthermore, residency established through false pretenses or fraud can be legally challenged. Vivian's composure cracked further. Daniel, are you going to let them speak to your mother this way? After everything I've sacrificed for you? It was the wrong approach. Daniel's expression hardened. Sacrificed? You've been systematically trying to steal my wife's inheritance while destroying her mental health and our marriage. That's not sacrifice, Mom. That's exploitation. I was trying to secure your future. By controlling it, Daniel countered. Just like you've always done. Dad warned me before he died, you know. He said your need for control would eventually destroy everything around you if I let it. Vivian recoiled as if slapped. Your father never said any such thing. He did. The night before he died, when you were getting coffee. He told me to be careful, that your gambling was worse than I knew, and that you'd come after my assets next. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. I didn't want to believe him. Even when you showed up here with your story about the apartment, part of me wondered if Dad had been right. But I pushed those doubts away because it was easier than facing the truth. The revelation about Henry's warning and Vivian's gambling changed the atmosphere in the room. Vivian's carefully constructed persona had completely collapsed, revealing the desperate, manipulative woman beneath. I need you to leave, Daniel said firmly. Today. Now. And go where? Vivian demanded, abandoning any pretense of frailty. Her injured wrist, I noticed, was suddenly supporting her weight as she leaned forward aggressively. That's not our concern, I said, finding my voice. You have a sister with a perfectly habitable spare room, remember? The one that was supposedly being renovated? For a moment, I thought Vivian might continue arguing, but something in our united front must have convinced her that this battle was lost. She stood, smoothing her clothes with dignity that seemed incongruous given the circumstances. I'll need time to pack my things. You can take personal items now, Megan said. The rest can be arranged after we've verified none of Rachel's. Missing documents or possessions are among your belongings. Vivian's gaze hardened. You have no right to search my private property. And you had no right to take my birth certificate or house deed, I countered. Yet here we are. Under Mark and Megan's watchful eyes, Vivian gathered essentials from the downstairs bathroom and my office where she'd been sleeping. Daniel accompanied her upstairs to collect clothing and toiletries, his expression grim and determined despite the obvious emotional toll. I remained in the living room, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of confrontation began to ebb. Megan sat beside me, her presence a steady comfort. You did it, she said quietly. You stood your ground. We're not finished yet, I replied, thinking of the damage done to my business, my reputation, and my marriage. This is just the beginning of cleaning up her mess. Daniel and Vivian descended the stairs, her wheeling a suitcase, his face a mask of controlled grief. At the front door, Vivian turned to me, her expression a blend of defiance and calculation. This isn't over, Rachel. Family is forever, and Daniel will eventually see that I was only trying to help. Goodbye, Vivian, I replied simply, refusing to engage with her manipulation. Daniel walked his mother to her car, their conversation too distant to overhear. Through the window, I watched them speak, saw Vivian's animated gestures and Daniel's increasingly resolved posture. When he finally stepped back from the vehicle, his body language spoke of finality. As Vivian's car disappeared down the street, Daniel stood in the driveway for several long moments before returning to the house. The Daniel who walked through. The door looked both older and somehow freer than the man who had left minutes earlier. She's gone, he said unnecessarily. I told her not to contact either of us until she's gotten professional help for her gambling and manipulation. The practical matters of Vivian's departure occupied the next several hours. Mark and Megan helped us document the state of the house. photograph areas Vivian had altered, and catalog items that remained missing. We changed locks, passwords, and security questions on every account. We filed official statements with our bank regarding the unauthorized inquiries Vivian had made. By late afternoon, the immediate crisis had been addressed, and Megan and Mark departed with promises to continue the legal work needed to formally block Vivian's conservatorship attempt. Their absence left Daniel and me alone for the first time. Since the confrontation, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. "I don't know where to start," Daniel said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I betrayed you. I let her manipulate me into doubting your sanity, your competence, everything I know about you. Why?" The question emerged softer than I intended, the hurt behind it still raw. "How could you believe her over me?" Daniel sank onto the couch, shoulders hunched with the weight of his actions. "It was gradual. She would mention small things. You forgetting a call that never happened, missing an appointment that didn't exist. Little inconsistencies that seemed minor on their own. And you never thought to verify any of it?" "I did at first," he admitted. "But she was always ready with explanations. The call went to voicemail, the appointment was in her calendar from when you mentioned it. And then she started on the bigger narrative, that you were struggling with the pressure of your business, that your attachment to this house was becoming unhealthy." He looked up at me, his expression haunted. "She's always been like this, creating narratives that bend reality to get what she wants. When I was a kid, she did it to control my friendships, my activities, my relationship with my father. I thought I'd outgrown her influence when I left home, but patterns established in childhood are hard to break," I finished for him, understanding despite my anger. I'd seen enough of Vivian's manipulation techniques to recognize their insidious power, especially on someone conditioned from birth to respond to them. "That's not an excuse," Daniel said quickly. "Nothing excuses what I did, what I almost let happen to you." "No," I agreed. "It's not an excuse, but it helps me understand." Silence fell between us, filled with the enormity of what we'd been through and the uncertain path ahead. The foundation of our marriage had been severely damaged, trust fractured in ways that wouldn't heal easily. "What happens now?" Daniel asked eventually. It was the question I'd been avoiding since Vivian's departure. What did happen now? Could our marriage recover from this profound betrayal? Did I want it to? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I need time to process everything, to rebuild what she destroyed in my life." "Your business is in shambles," I confirmed grimly. 3 major clients canceled after Vivian's concerned conversations with them. My teaching schedule is half what it was before she started interrupting sessions. My professional reputation has been damaged in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Daniel winced. "I'll do whatever it takes to help you rebuild, if you'll let me." His offer hung in the air between us, sincere but complicated by his role in creating the damage he now offered to repair. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Got the full recording from the nanny cam. You need to see this ASAP." "I have to meet Jason," I said, grateful for the interruption. "He has something important." Daniel nodded, accepting the postponement of our difficult conversation. "I'll be here. Whenever you're ready to talk, I'll be here." The copper cup was nearly empty when I arrived, the late afternoon lull creating a bubble of privacy in the corner booth where Jason waited with his laptop. "This is big, Rach," he said without preamble, opening the computer. "The nanny cam caught Vivian during a phone call while you were upstairs getting ready this morning." He turned the screen toward me and pressed play. The footage showed Vivian in our living room, speaking quietly but clearly into her phone, all pretense of injury completely abandoned. "It's falling apart, Judith," she said, pacing with fluid movements that belied her earlier performance of pain. That lawyer friend of hers showed up. No, I think Daniel's still malleable, but we need to accelerate. The gambling debts are due next week, and Carson made it very clear what happens if I don't pay. She paused, listening to her sister. Of course I know it's illegal, but we're talking about $340,000 in debt. The house would clear that and leave plenty for both of us. Yes, I already found a buyer. Carson knows people who pay cash, no questions asked. My breath caught. The amount was staggering, far more than I'd imagined from the collection notices I'd found. And the mention of a pre-arranged buyer suggested connections to people who operated outside legal channels. If Daniel won't cooperate, we'll have to use the other approach, Vivian continued, her voice hardening. Rachel's signature can be managed if necessary. I have samples from her checkbook. No, he doesn't need to know that part. Just get the papers ready, and I'll handle Daniel. The recording continued for another minute, with Vivian discussing specific plans to forge my signature on property transfer documents if their conservatorship attempt failed. She mentioned names: Carson, Tony, someone called the broker, that sounded like organized crime connections rather than legitimate business associates. Jesus, I whispered as Jason stopped the playback. This goes way beyond family manipulation. She's involved with loan sharks. Which explains the urgency and the desperation, Jason agreed. This wasn't just about controlling you or even about normal financial trouble. She's in deep with dangerous people. I sat back, processing the implications. Have you shown this to Megan or Mark? Sent it right after I texted you. Mark's already talking about bringing in law enforcement. This crosses from civil matters into potential criminal conspiracy. The severity of the situation hit me anew. Vivian hadn't just been trying to manipulate her way into my assets. She'd been actively planning to commit fraud, potentially putting both Daniel and me at risk from her criminal associates. I need to tell Daniel, I said, already reaching for my phone. He needs to know what he's really dealing with. Jason's hand covered mine, stopping me. Are you sure that's wise? We still don't know how complicit he might be. The recording makes it clear he wasn't aware of the forgery plan or the loan. Sharks, I pointed out, and you saw how he stood up to her today. After weeks of enabling her, Jason countered. Look, I know you love him, but people don't just suddenly break free from lifelong manipulation patterns. What if he contacts her after you tell him? What if he tries to help her out of her financial trouble? The questions were valid, hitting directly at my lingering doubts about Daniel's ability to maintain boundaries with his mother. I'd seen how quickly he fell back into patterns of acquiescence in her presence, how effective her emotional manipulation could be even when he recognized it. I can't keep him in the dark about something this serious, I decided finally. But I'll be careful. No details about law enforcement involvement yet. Just enough that he understands the depth of the situation. Jason looked unconvinced, but nodded. Your call. But maybe have this conversation somewhere public, just in case. You think my husband is dangerous? The question came out sharper than intended. I think people do unpredictable things when their family systems are threatened, Jason replied evenly. And Daniel has spent his entire life in Vivian's system. Though the suggestion stung, I couldn't dismiss Jason's concern entirely. The past weeks had shown how thoroughly Vivian could influence Daniel's perception and behavior. Was I certain that influence had been broken by a single confrontation? I'll meet him at Riverside Park, I compromised. Public enough to be safe, private enough to talk. I texted Daniel, asking him to meet me, then gathered my things. As I stood to leave, Jason handed me a small device. Voice recorder, he explained, just in case you need to document the conversation. The fact that such precautions felt necessary rather than paranoid showed how thoroughly Vivian had damaged my trust. Not just in her, but in my marriage and my own judgment. Riverside Park was peaceful in the early evening light, families packing, up after afternoon outings, the playground gradually emptying as dinner time approached. I found Daniel already waiting on a bench overlooking the water, his expression troubled but composed. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, sitting beside him but maintaining a careful distance. "Of course," he replied. "Is everything okay? Your text seemed urgent." I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. "Jason showed me a recording of your mother on the phone with Judith this morning. There's more to the situation than even we realized." Daniel tensed. "What kind of recording?" "From the security camera he installed," I answered. "Vivian was discussing her real financial situation and her plans if the conservatorship didn't work out." I watched his face carefully as I continued, detailing the massive gambling debts, the loan shark named Carson, and the contingency plan to forge my signature on property documents. $340,000? Daniel repeated, shock evident in his voice. "That can't be right. Mom's always been careful with money." "Apparently not when it comes to gambling," I said gently. "From what we could gather, she's been hiding this addiction for years." Daniel's face went through a complex series of emotions: denial, anger, grief, and finally a resigned acceptance that felt more genuine than his earlier reaction to the conservatorship revelation. "Dad knew," he said quietly. "That's what he was trying to warn me about before he died. He said her hobby had become something dangerous. I thought he meant her social gambling with friends, the weekly poker game she hosted. I had no idea it was this serious. She mentioned someone named Carson who made threats about what would happen if she didn't pay," I continued carefully, "and something about having a cash buyer already lined up for the house. Does that name mean anything to you?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but it would explain why she's been so desperate, if she owes money to the kind of people who make threats." He trailed off, the implications hanging in the air between us. "This is bigger than family drama now," I said. "These people could be dangerous, Daniel. To her, to us, to anyone who gets in the way of them collecting their money." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of overwhelming stress I'd seen frequently since Vivian's arrival. "What do we do? Call the police?" "Mark is considering that option," I admitted. "The recording contains evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, at minimum, which could send her to prison." Daniel's voice was hollow. "My mother, in prison." Despite everything, I felt a surge of sympathy for him. Whatever Vivian had done, she was still his mother, and the prospect of her facing criminal charges was understandably devastating. "There might be alternatives," I suggested carefully, "depending on how we handle the situation. But Daniel, I need to know where you stand in all this. I need to know I can trust you to put our safety and our marriage first, even against your mother's interests." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I let you down in the worst possible way, Rachel. I don't expect you to trust me right now. But I swear to you, I'm done enabling her manipulation and lies. Whatever happens next, I'm with you." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him, but the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too profound for simple declarations to repair the damage. "I need more than words," I said finally. "I need actions that prove where your loyalty lies." Daniel nodded, accepting this without argument. "Tell me what you need me to do." "First, absolutely no contact with Vivian or Judith without my knowledge and presence," I began. "Second, complete financial transparency. All accounts, all transactions, everything open to my review. Third, we change all our contact information, security questions, everything she might use to access our lives." These were basic protective measures, the foundation of any attempt to secure our lives against Vivian's continued interference. Daniel agreed to each without hesitation. "And we need to consider a restraining order," I added, watching his reaction carefully. Especially if there are criminal elements involved in her financial troubles. This was the true test, whether Daniel could support legal action against his mother despite the lifetime of conditioning that demanded he protect her at all costs. He was quiet for a long moment, struggle evident in his expression. Finally, he nodded. If that's what it takes to keep us safe, I'll sign whatever's necessary. Then the sincerity in his voice gave me the first glimmer of hope that perhaps, despite everything, our marriage might eventually heal. Not immediately, not easily, but possibly. There's something else we need to discuss, I said, shifting topics, slightly. The house. What about it? You've never fully understood what this house means to me, I explained. It's not just property or an investment. It's the last physical connection I have to my parents. It's where I grew up, where every room holds memories of them. Selling it would be like losing them all over again. Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. I never saw it that way. I just saw a big old house that needed constant maintenance. Because that's how your mother framed it, I pointed out. She deliberately characterized my attachment as irrational rather than acknowledging its emotional significance. I'm sorry, he said simply. I should have seen that. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching the river flow past, each lost in our own thoughts. The path forward wasn't clear, but at least we were beginning to identify the obstacles that had divided us. Megan thinks we should make a formal police report, I said eventually. About the threats, the forgery plans, all of it. Daniel tensed but nodded. She's right. If Mom is involved with dangerous people, law enforcement needs to know. It would mean revealing everything. Her gambling, her manipulation, the conservatorship. Attempt. I understand, he said heavily. And I'll support whatever decision you make. This is your house she tried to steal, your life she tried to destroy. You get to decide how we handle it. His deference to my judgment felt like the first real acknowledgement of the power imbalance Vivian had created between us, and his commitment to correcting it. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with an incoming call from Megan, I answered, putting it on speaker so Daniel could hear. Rachel? Where are you right now? Megan's voice was tense with urgency. Riverside Park with Daniel. What's wrong? You need to come to my office right away. Jason forwarded the recording to Mark, who shared it with a colleague in the prosecutor's office. They've issued a warrant for Vivian's arrest based on the conspiracy evidence and her connections to known criminal elements. Daniel's face paled. Arrest? Already? The Carson she mentioned is Carson Delgado, who's been under investigation for loan sharking and real estate fraud for months, Megan explained. Your mother's phone call connected some dots they've been trying to establish in an ongoing investigation. This is bigger than just your situation now. I felt lightheaded as the scope of Vivian's entanglement became clear. Where is she now? Have they found her? That's why you need to come in. She's gone. When officers went to Judith's house, they found Judith, but no sign of Vivian. According to Judith, Vivian took several $1,000s from her safe and mentioned heading to Canada. Daniel stood abruptly. She's running. And she knows all our information, accounts, passwords we haven't changed yet, property details. The implications hit me with fresh urgency. Vivian on the run from both criminal charges and loan sharks, desperate for money, and armed with intimate knowledge of our lives and finances. We'll be right there, I told Megan, already gathering my things. Call Jason and tell him to check the house. Make sure she hasn't gone back there. As we hurried to the car, Daniel's expression was grim but resolved. I'll call the bank again. Freeze anything we missed earlier, and I should warn my office. She has keys to the building. The practical focus on security measures provided temporary distraction from the emotional weight of the situation. But as we drove toward Megan's office, the reality settled over us like a physical presence. Vivian wasn't just a manipulative mother-in-law anymore. She was a fugitive with dangerous connections, intimate knowledge of our lives, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The battle for my home had evolved into something far more perilous than I could have imagined when I first found Vivian rearranging my kitchen. Now we weren't just fighting for property or even for the integrity of our marriage. We were potentially fighting for our safety against a woman who had proven herself capable of extraordinary deception and callousness. As we pulled into the parking lot of Megan's office building, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. I won't let her hurt you again." I squeezed back, not fully trusting yet, but willing to take this first small step toward rebuilding. Together then. We walked into the building side by side, united at last against the storm Vivian had created, and the greater one that might still be coming. Megan's office had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Mark Stevens stood by a whiteboard, covered with timelines and connections, while a serious-looking woman in a tailored suit examined documents at Megan's desk. Two uniformed police officers conversed quietly by the window. "Rachel, Daniel," Megan gestured us inside. "This is Detective Andrea Reyes from the Financial Crimes Unit. She's coordinating with the task force investigating Carson Delgado's operation." Detective Reyes looked up, her shrewd eyes assessing us quickly. "Mrs. Parker, Mr. Parker, I understand this situation began as a family matter and has escalated significantly. I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle of something much larger." "How much larger?" I asked, settling into a chair across from her. Daniel remained standing, his posture tense. "Carson Delgado has been on our radar for 3 years," Reyes explained. "He operates what appears to be legitimate real estate investments, but it's primarily a money laundering operation for gambling proceeds. He also runs an extensive loan, sharking business targeting gambling addicts across 3 states. And my mother is involved with him?" Daniel's voice was strained. "Based on the recorded call and financial records we've subpoenaed, Vivian Parker has been in debt to Delgado's organization for approximately 18 months. The debt has grown substantially in recent weeks, suggesting she may have been borrowing more to try covering earlier losses, a common pattern with gambling addiction." The clinical way Detective Reyes described Vivian's downward spiral made it somehow more real than all our earlier discoveries. This wasn't just family drama, it was a documented criminal case. "The concerning development," Reyes continued, "is that your mother appears to have been recruited as what we call a property scout, someone who identifies vulnerable real estate that can be acquired below market value through various forms of duress or manipulation." "My house," I said, the pieces clicking into place. That's why she was so focused on getting control of it. It wasn't just about solving her financial problems. She was working for Delgado. "It appears that way," Reyes confirmed. "The cash buyer she mentioned is likely one of Delgado's shell companies. They purchase properties through distressed sales, perform minimal cosmetic renovations, then flip them at inflated prices, often to other shell companies, to launder money through the transactions." Daniel sank into the chair beside me, the weight of his mother's betrayal visibly crushing him. All this time, I thought she was just being controlling and difficult, but she was actually working with criminals to steal Rachel's inheritance. "People in desperate financial circumstances make choices they wouldn't otherwise consider," Reyes said, her tone softening slightly. "Gambling addiction is particularly insidious because it creates escalating financial pressure alongside irrational belief in the possibility of solving those problems with one big win." "You make it sound like she's a victim," I noted, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. "Not a victim," Reyes clarified, "but possibly someone operating under duress. The threats these organizations make aren't empty. Vivian Parker may have believed her cooperation was necessary for her safety." The possibility that Vivian had been acting partly from fear rather than pure greed added an uncomfortable layer of complexity to a situation I'd begun to see in clear moral terms. Had she been manipulating us to save herself from danger? Did that change anything about what she'd done? What happens now? Daniel asked, voicing the question foremost in my mind. We're attempting to locate your mother before either Delgado's people or our Canadian counterparts do, Reyes explained. Based on financial transactions we're tracking, we believe she may be heading toward Windsor, Ontario. And if you find her, she'll face charges related to conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted financial exploitation, and potentially serving as an accessory to money laundering. However, Reyes added, glancing at Mark, depending on her willingness to cooperate with our ongoing investigation into Delgado's operation, there may be room for negotiation regarding those charges. The implication was clear. Vivian might avoid the worst legal consequences if she helped bring down the larger criminal enterprise. It was a possibility I hadn't considered, one that left me with conflicted feelings. What about our safety? I asked. If Delgado's organization realizes Vivian failed to deliver my property and is now potentially cooperating with law enforcement, Reyes nodded, understanding my concern. We're implementing protective measures for both of you, starting immediately. An officer will accompany you home tonight and remain on watch. We're also expediting the processing of a restraining order against Vivian Parker, though I should note that such measures are primarily useful against individuals who respect legal boundaries. The clinical assessment of our danger was somehow more frightening than dramatic warnings would have been. This wasn't television drama. It was a law enforcement professional calmly explaining that our lives had intersected with organized crime. I'd like to recommend that you not return to your home tonight, Reyes continued. We have officers securing the property and checking for any signs of tampering or unauthorized entry, but until we're confident the situation is contained, a hotel would be safer. Daniel and I exchanged glances, the same thought clearly passing between us. Vivian had turned our sanctuary into a potential danger zone. We can stay with my brother, I suggested. His place has good security, and he doesn't have any connection to Vivian that would make it an obvious location to check. Reyes considered this, then nodded. That's acceptable. Officer Michaels will accompany you to collect essential items from your home, then follow you to your brother's residence. The next several hours passed in a blur of practical arrangements. We provided statements, reviewed financial records, and signed formal complaints against Vivian. Jason was alerted to the plan, immediately offering his guest room and promising to secure his home further. By the time Officer Michaels escorted us back to our house, darkness had fallen, lending an ominous quality to the familiar structure. 2 police cruisers were parked outside, their presence both reassuring and surreal. We've cleared the interior, a senior officer reported. No signs of forced entry or disturbance. Tech team has disabled remote access to your smart home systems and changed access codes. Inside, the house felt different, tainted by knowledge of what had nearly happened there. Vivian's presence lingered in subtle ways. A jacket she'd left, hanging by the door, a novel with her bookmark still in place, a half-empty bottle of her preferred wine in the kitchen. Let's be quick, Daniel suggested, sensing my discomfort. Just grab what we need for a few days. I nodded, moving through the rooms with purpose rather than allowing myself to dwell on the violation of what should have been our safe space. In our bedroom, I packed clothes, toiletries, and medications, then gathered my laptop and essential work materials from a locked cabinet in my office, now restored to its proper function after Vivian's occupation. As I collected items from the bathroom, I noticed something odd in the medicine cabinet, prescription bottles with my name on them that I didn't recognize. I examined them more closely. Antipsychotic medications prescribed by Dr. Martin, dated just 2 days earlier. Daniel, I called, my voice tight. Come look at this. He appeared in the doorway, frowning at the bottles in my hand. I never saw Dr. Martin. I never received these prescriptions. Daniel took the bottles, reading the labels with growing alarm. She was setting up a paper trail. prescriptions in your name for medications you weren't taking, which would create symptoms if I actually did take them, I finished grimly. And then documentation of non-compliance with treatment when tests showed I wasn't taking prescribed medication. The calculated nature of the plan, creating falsified medical records that would support the conservatorship petition, sent a chill through me. Vivian had thought of everything, laying groundwork that would have been difficult to disprove once in place. "We should show these to Detective Reyes," Daniel said, carefully placing the bottles in an evidence bag provided. Earlier, this goes beyond manipulation into outright medical fraud. Officer Michaels appeared in the hallway. "Everything okay in here?" "We found falsified prescriptions," Daniel explained, showing him the evidence bag. "More proof of the conspiracy." The officer nodded, speaking into his radio to update the detective. "They want you to bring those directly to the station. Also, we've just received word that Border Patrol has a potential sighting of Vivian Parker attempting to enter Canada at the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel. They're detaining her for questioning." The news hit Daniel visibly, his shoulders sagging, with a mixture of relief and grief. His mother was being detained by Border Patrol, a reality that would have seemed unimaginable just days ago. "Let's finish packing," I said gently, touching his arm. "We can process this once we're somewhere safe." He nodded, moving mechanically through the remaining preparations. Within 30 minutes, we were following Officer Michaels to Jason's house across town, our car loaded with essentials and the strange prescription bottles safely delivered to law enforcement. Jason welcomed us with the practical support that had always been his way. No intrusive questions, just clear directions to the guest room, freshly changed linens, and a simple meal already prepared. His partner Michael handled the security aspects, checking window locks and explaining the alarm system while Officer Michaels established a patrol schedule with local units. That night, in the unfamiliar quiet of Jason's guest room, Daniel and I lay side by side, physically close, but separated by the weight of all that had happened. "They found her," he said finally, breaking the silence. "My mother is in custody." "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully, unsure of his emotional state regarding Vivian after all that had transpired. He was quiet for a long moment. "Relieved," he admitted finally, "and devastated, and angry, and somehow still worried about her." He turned toward me in the darkness. "Is that insane? To still be concerned about someone who tried to destroy everything we have?" "She's your mother," I said simply. "That relationship doesn't just disappear, even after everything she's done." "But what she did to you?" His voice caught. "How can I still care about someone who deliberately tried to make you appear mentally unstable? Who planned to steal your home and destroy your reputation?" I had no answer that could resolve that contradiction. The complexity of family bonds defied simple categorization, persisting sometimes even in the face of profound betrayal. "I don't expect you to stop caring about her," I said finally. "But I do need to know that your concern for her won't override your commitment to our safety and well-being." "Never again," he promised, reaching for my hand in the darkness. "I let that happen once, and it nearly cost me everything that matters." I accepted his hand, the small connection a tentative step toward whatever our relationship might become. In the aftermath of Vivian's destruction. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement of the possibility that healing might eventually occur. Morning brought news from Detective Reyes. Vivian had been detained while attempting to cross into Canada using a passport belonging to Judith's daughter. Border officials had recognized her from the alert issued hours earlier. She was now in custody, facing additional charges related to identity theft and fleeing prosecution. "She's asking to speak with Daniel," Reyes informed us during a conference call. "It's your decision whether to agree to that, but if you do, we'd want it to happen in a controlled environment with law enforcement present." Daniel looked to me, the question clear in his expression. Did I object to him seeing Vivian? "It's your choice," I said, though the prospect of them communicating made me uneasy. But I'd want to be there too. He nodded. I need to hear what she has to say, but I won't do it without Rachel present. We face this together, or not at all. The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at the downtown precinct, a sterile interview room with recording equipment and one-way glass, allowing Detective Reyes and other officers to monitor the interaction. Megan accompanied us as legal counsel, her presence a steadying influence as we waited for Vivian to be brought in. When the door finally opened, the woman who entered bore little resemblance to the poised, controlling figure who had invaded our home weeks earlier. Vivian looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by standard-issue detention center attire, her carefully maintained appearance showing signs of strain. "Daniel," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for coming." Her gaze shifted to me, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "And Rachel, I didn't expect you'd want to see me." "I'm here for Daniel," I said simply, "and to protect our interests." Vivian nodded, apparently accepting this explanation. She settled into the chair across from us, hands folded on the table, the picture of composure despite her circumstances. "I imagine you have questions," she began, addressing Daniel directly. "Why?" The single word contained multitudes. Why the lies? Why the manipulation? Why the betrayal of her own son and his wife? Vivian sighed, an expression of rehearsed regret that I no longer trusted. The situation spiraled beyond what I initially intended. The gambling. It became something I couldn't control. The debts grew, and then Delgado's people made it clear that failure to pay would have consequences. "So you decided the solution was to steal Rachel's house?" Daniel's voice hardened. "To manipulate me into believing my wife was mentally unstable." "I was desperate," Vivian admitted, though her tone lacked genuine remorse. "Delgado suggested the property angle after seeing photos of your house on social media. He said it was perfect for their portfolio. Historic character, good neighborhood, substantial equity. All I had to do was help facilitate the acquisition." The casual way she described the planned theft of my inheritance sent a wave of cold anger through me. "You did more than facilitate," I interjected. "You created an elaborate scheme to destroy my credibility, damage my business, isolate me from support, and manipulate medical records. That goes far beyond desperation." Vivian's gaze shifted to me, calculating even now. "You wouldn't have sold willingly. We both know how irrationally attached you are to that house, despite its impracticality." "It's not irrational to value my parents' legacy," I countered. "What's irrational is believing you had any right to take it from me." Daniel placed a warning hand on my arm, sensing my rising anger. "Mom, the prescriptions we found, antipsychotic medications with Rachel's name on them. How did that happen?" For the first time, Vivian appeared genuinely uncomfortable. "Judith has connections in the medical field. Dr. Martin is an associate of hers who was willing to establish a paper trail." "You were going to drug me," I said flatly. "That was the plan, wasn't it? Get me to take medication that would actually cause symptoms, then use those symptoms to justify the conservatorship." Vivian didn't deny it, her silence confirmation enough. "Jesus, Mom," Daniel whispered, horror evident in his voice. "Do you understand what you were doing? What could have happened to Rachel because of your actions?" "I was trying to solve an impossible situation," Vivian insisted. "Delgado made it clear what would happen if I didn't deliver the property or an equivalent cash payment." "So you sacrificed us instead," Daniel concluded. "My marriage, Rachel's well-being, our trust, all acceptable collateral damage to save yourself." Vivian leaned forward, her expression hardening. "You have no idea what these people are capable of. I was protecting you by handling it myself." "Protecting us?" I laughed incredulously. "By putting us directly in their crosshairs? By making Us targets for loan sharks and money launderers. How exactly was that protection? Before Vivian could respond, Megan intervened. Let's focus on practical matters. Ms. Parker, Detective Reyes indicates there may be consideration for cooperation with the larger investigation into Delgado's operation. Is that something you're willing to discuss? The shift to legal implications seemed to center Vivian, her posture straightening as she considered her options. I have information they would find valuable, she acknowledged. Names, operations, properties already processed through their system. And in exchange, you want leniency, I surmised. I want protection, Vivian corrected. Delgado's organization doesn't forgive people who cooperate with law enforcement. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, focusing primarily on Vivian's potential cooperation with authorities rather than the personal damage she'd caused. Throughout the discussion, I watched her carefully, noting how she maintained focus on future arrangements rather than acknowledging past wrongs. When we finally emerged from the interview room, Daniel looked physically ill. Detective Reyes met us in the hallway, her expression professionally neutral. Thank you for facilitating that conversation, she said. It helped establish Ms. Parker's willingness to cooperate, which will be significant in how we proceed. What happens now? Daniel asked, his voice hollow. She'll remain in custody while we coordinate with the prosecutor's office regarding potential cooperation agreements. Given the charges and the evidence, she's facing significant jail time regardless. But cooperation could affect recommendations regarding sentencing and facility placement. The clinical assessment of Vivian's future hit Daniel visibly. Whatever her crimes, whatever her betrayal, the reality of his mother facing incarceration was clearly devastating. And what about us? I asked, focusing on the practical aspects. How long do we need to maintain protective measures? Delgado's organization typically abandons operations that come under law enforcement scrutiny, Reyes explained. However, given Ms. Parker's cooperation, we recommend maintaining caution for at least several weeks. We'll have officers monitoring your property and providing regular patrols. It wasn't the clean resolution I'd hoped for. No immediate return to normalcy. No instant restoration of safety. The ripple effects of Vivian's actions would continue affecting our lives for weeks or months to come. The following days established a strange new routine. We remained at Jason's house while officers searched our home thoroughly for any surveillance devices or tampering Vivian might have implemented. Mark Stevens handled legal paperwork, officially revoking any powers of attorney or medical proxies. Daniel held, replacing them with updated documents naming Jason and Megan as my legal representatives in case of emergency. Megan helped me begin rebuilding my professional reputation, reaching out to clients who had received Vivian's concerned calls and explaining the situation in carefully worded terms that emphasized criminal exploitation rather than family drama. Some relationships proved salvageable. Others were permanently damaged by the seeds of doubt Vivian had planted. Throughout this period, Daniel maintained a careful distance from his mother, receiving updates about her cooperation with authorities, but declining further direct contact. He focused instead on supporting my recovery efforts and addressing the practical aspects of securing our lives against both Vivian's influence and potential retaliation from Delgado's organization. The security company finished installing the new system today, he reported one evening, 2 weeks after Vivian's arrest. They've added motion sensors in the basement and cameras covering all entry points. The footage backs up to a secure cloud, server that only you and I can access. I nodded, appreciating his attention to detail while recognizing the underlying truth. Our home would never feel quite as safe as it once had. The violation of that space had changed it fundamentally, adding shadows to once bright corners. Detective Reyes called, Daniel continued, setting aside the security paperwork. They've finished processing the conservatorship documents. The fingerprint analysis confirmed Judith's involvement in preparing them. She's now facing charges as an accessory. The steady accumulation of evidence against Vivian and her sister had been both validating and disturbing. Each new revelation confirmed the extensive planning that had gone into their scheme, the calculated effort to systematically dismantle my life and seize my inheritance. Has your mother said anything more about Judith's role? I asked carefully. The sisters' relationship remained somewhat murky, with Vivian alternately portraying Judith as a reluctant participant and an active conspirator. Not directly to me, Daniel replied, but according to Reyes, she's been quite forthcoming about Judith's connections to Dr. Martin and her role in creating the false medical documentation. Apparently, she's making sure her sister shares responsibility rather than taking all the blame herself. The observation matched what I'd seen of Vivian's character, her willingness to sacrifice others to improve her own position. Even family. Loyalty had limits when self-preservation was at stake. The prosecutor is offering a plea deal, Daniel added after a moment. Reduced charges in exchange for comprehensive testimony against Delgado's operation. If she accepts, she's looking at 5 to 7 years instead of potential decades. How do you feel about that? I asked, watching his expression carefully. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Relieved that it's not worse? Devastated? That it's come to this? I don't know, Rachel. Part of me thinks she deserves the maximum sentence for what she tried to do to you, to us. Another part remembers her as the woman who read me bedtime stories and taught me to ride a bike. The complexity of his emotions was understandable. Vivian wasn't just a criminal who had targeted us. She was the foundation of Daniel's earliest attachments, a figure impossible to simply excise from his emotional landscape regardless of her actions. You're allowed to have conflicted feelings, I assured him. What she did was inexcusable, but that doesn't erase your entire history with her. He looked at me with something like wonder. How can you be so understanding after what she put you through? I'm not being understanding for her sake, I clarified. I'm acknowledging the reality of your position because I care about you. Hating Vivian doesn't require me to hate the fact that you still have complicated feelings about your mother. It was a distinction I'd been working to maintain, separating my justifiable anger toward Vivian from my relationship with Daniel. His unwitting participation in her schemes remained a wound between us, but one that seemed increasingly possible to heal as he consistently demonstrated his commitment to rebuilding trust. 3 weeks after Vivian's arrest, Detective Reyes finally cleared us to return to our home. The property had been thoroughly secured, with new locks, an advanced security system, and regular police patrols established in the neighborhood. Delgado himself had been arrested based partly on Vivian's testimony, reducing the risk of retaliation from his organization. Standing in our entryway that first day back, I felt the weight of both apprehension and determination. This house, my parents' legacy, had nearly been stolen through elaborate manipulation. But it remained mine, a physical connection to family that Vivian had failed to sever despite her best efforts. We should cleanse the space, Daniel suggested, sensitive to my hesitation. Sage, new paint, rearrange the furniture, whatever, would help remove her lingering presence. The suggestion was thoughtful, acknowledging the psychological impact of Vivian's invasion rather than dismissing it as merely emotional, as he might have done before. I'd like that, I agreed. Starting with reclaiming my office completely, the room Vivian had commandeered during her stay remained the most psychologically contaminated space, her energy lingering in the rearranged furniture and subtle alterations she'd made. Together, we stripped it back to basics, removing window, treatments she'd added, returning furniture to my preferred arrangement, cleansing surfaces with purifying oils that filled the room with scents of lavender and rosemary. What about the guest room? Daniel asked as we finished. Do you want to change anything there? I considered the question, visualizing the space where Vivian had hidden her lockbox of damning documents and planned her takeover of our lives. Actually, I think I want to transform it completely, I decided. Not just cleanse it, but give it an entirely new purpose. What kind of purpose? I smiled, an idea taking shape that felt like reclamation rather than reaction. A dedicated space for my parents' memorabilia. The boxes from the basement that Vivian wanted to discard, they deserve proper shelving, display space, a room where their memory is honored rather than hidden away. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding the significance of the choice. Turning the space she tried to claim permanently into a shrine to exactly what she wanted erased. I liked the symmetry of that. The project became our focus over the following weeks, a physical manifestation of reclaiming our home and our relationship. As we sorted through my parents' belongings, carefully organizing photographs and keepsakes, conversations naturally turned to memories and values, the foundations that Vivian had attempted to undermine. "Your father built this bookcase," I explained, running my hand along the carefully crafted oak shelving we'd brought up from the basement. "He made it when I started collecting those illustrated classics as a teenager." Daniel examined the craftsmanship with genuine appreciation. "The dovetail joints are perfect. He was really talented." "He would have liked you," I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. Not the you that followed Vivian's lead, but the real you, the one who creates things, who solves problems, who sees value in what others have built. The observation seemed to touch something deep in Daniel. "I want to be worthy of that," he said quietly. "Of your parents' legacy, of your trust." I lost sight of who I really am when Mom was here, fell back into patterns I thought I'd outgrown. "We're both learning," I acknowledged. "Me about setting stronger boundaries, you about recognizing manipulation before it takes hold." We worked side by side, transforming the room where Vivian had slept into a warm, inviting space filled with family history. Daniel crafted custom display shelves for my mother's pottery collection, including the pieces Vivian had carelessly chipped. I arranged photographs chronologically, creating a visual timeline of my parents' lives together. When the memorial room was finally complete, we stood in the doorway together, appreciating what we'd created from the ashes of Vivian's destruction. "This feels right," Daniel said, his arm around my shoulders. "Not erasing what happened, but transforming it into something meaningful." The observation captured the essence of our broader healing process, not denying the damage done or pretending it hadn't changed us, but deliberately creating something new from the experience. 6 months after Vivian's arrest, we received notification that she had accepted the prosecutor's plea deal. 5 years in a medium security facility, with potential for parole after serving 3, in exchange for comprehensive testimony against Delgado's organization. Judith had received a similar but slightly reduced sentence, acknowledging her secondary role in the conspiracy. Daniel read the notification in our kitchen, the morning light casting gentle patterns across the counter where we'd once argued about Vivian's presence. "It's official," he said simply, setting down the paper. 5 years. I watched him carefully, gauging his reaction. "Are you okay?" He considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had characterized his approach to difficult emotions throughout our healing process. "I think I am," he said finally. "Not happy, obviously. But there's a certain relief in having it finalized, in knowing exactly what we're dealing with rather than living with uncertainty." "Have you decided whether you'll visit her?" It was a question we'd circled around as the legal proceedings advanced, never quite resolving. "Not immediately," he replied. "I need more distance, more time to establish who I am without her influence before I risk exposing myself to it again." The recognition of his own vulnerability to Vivian's manipulation represented significant growth from the man who had once unquestioningly accepted her intrusion into our lives. He was learning to protect himself, and by extension, our marriage, from patterns established in childhood. "Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'll support you," I assured him. "Just as long as we communicate openly about it." "Always," he promised, reaching across the counter to take my hand. "No more secrets, no more unilateral decisions. We face everything together." The simplicity of the commitment belied its profound importance in rebuilding what Vivian had nearly destroyed. Together had become our watchword, the foundation upon which we were reconstructing trust day by day. That evening, we sat on the back porch overlooking my mother's rose garden, now restored from Vivian's aggressive pruning and blooming with renewed vigor. The scent of heritage roses filled the air, a living connection to the past that had almost been severed. "I've been thinking about something your mother said during that first interview," I mentioned, watching the fading sunlight play across the flowers. "About my irrational attachment to this house." Daniel tensed slightly at the mention of Vivian, but nodded for me to continue. "She was wrong about the irrationality of it, but she wasn't entirely wrong about attachment itself. I was defining myself partly through this physical space, through preserving everything exactly as my parents left it." "That's understandable," Daniel said carefully. "It's your connection to them." "It is," I agreed. "But I think I was also using that preservation as a way of avoiding moving forward in some ways, keeping everything static, unchanged, as if that could somehow keep their memory more present." The realization had been gradually forming throughout the healing process, particularly as we transformed the guest room into a dedicated memorial space. The changes we've made, they've actually strengthened my connection to my parents rather than diminishing it. Creating active, intentional space for their memory instead of just preserving things passively. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Evolution rather than stagnation. Honoring the past while still allowing growth. "Exactly," I smiled, appreciating his understanding. "And I think that applies to us, too. To our marriage. We can't go back to what we were before Vivian arrived. That relationship had vulnerabilities we didn't recognize. But we can build something stronger, more intentional from what we've learned." The comparison resonated with both of us, not trying to erase the damage done or pretend it hadn't changed us, but instead incorporating those changes into a more resilient bond. As darkness settled over the garden, we remained on the porch, planning renovations that would honor the home's history while adapting it to our evolving needs, not erasing my parents' legacy, but building thoughtfully upon it. Not forgetting Vivian's betrayal, but refusing to let it define our future. The house around us stood solid and enduring, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical. Like the heritage roses in the garden. It had been damaged but not destroyed, ready to bloom again with proper care and attention. The next morning I woke early, drawn to my office by the familiar pull of creativity that had been diminished during Vivian's presence, but had gradually returned in the months following her departure. Settling at my desk, I opened a new design. Project, a commission for a community heritage center that would showcase local family histories. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. After nearly losing my own family legacy, I was now helping others preserve and celebrate theirs. The work felt meaningful in a way that transcended mere profession, connecting to the deeper purpose that Vivian had failed to understand or value. Daniel found me there an hour later, bringing coffee and quiet companionship as sunlight streamed through windows that had been rearranged to Vivian's specifications and now restored to their original function. He'd been establishing similar morning rituals, small, consistent demonstrations of support that gradually rebuilt trust one interaction at a time. "I like seeing you working here again," he observed, setting my coffee beside my sketches. "This space feels right with you in it." The simple observation captured a broader truth about our home. It had always been more than just a physical structure or financial asset. It was a container for meaningful work, for family history, for the life we were continuing to build together despite everything Vivian had done to destroy it. When the phone rang, I answered without the tension that had accompanied unexpected communications in the early days after Vivian's arrest. Time and safety measures had gradually reduced that hypervigilance, allowing normal rhythms to resume. Rachel Parker speaking. Mrs. Parker, this is Warden Matthews from Lakeside Correctional. I'm calling regarding Vivian Parker. The unexpected mention of my mother-in-law sent a jolt through me, though not the paralyzing fear it might once have triggered. What about her? I asked, putting the call on speaker so Daniel could hear. She's requested to send you a letter. Under the terms of her plea agreement, any communication with family members must be approved by both the recipient and her counselor. Are you willing to receive correspondence from her? I looked at Daniel, leaving the decision entirely in his hands. This was his mother, his relationship to navigate. He considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll accept the letter, he told the warden. But we reserve the right to refuse future communications if the content is manipulative or inappropriate. Understood, Mr. Parker. The letter will be reviewed by her counselor before being forwarded to you. It should arrive within the week. After ending the call, we sat in thoughtful silence, processing this unexpected development. Vivian reaching out represented another phase in our ongoing recovery, a test of boundaries and growth we'd established in her absence. Are you sure about this? I asked finally. You don't have to maintain contact if you're not ready. I'm not sure, Daniel admitted. But I think it's necessary for me to hear what she has to say and decide for myself how to respond, rather than avoiding the situation entirely. His willingness to engage thoughtfully rather than reactively with this difficult choice reflected the growth he'd achieved in the months since Vivian's arrest. No longer the son who automatically accommodated his mother's demands, he now approached the relationship with careful boundaries and clear-eyed assessment. Whatever the letter contains, I said, we'll face it together. He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes with genuine warmth. Together. That's the one thing Vivian never understood. She saw relationships as transactions, as power dynamics to be manipulated. She couldn't comprehend partnership based on mutual support. The observation was insightful, capturing the fundamental flaw in Vivian's worldview that had ultimately led to her downfall. In trying to control everything around her, she had failed to recognize the strength that comes from genuine connection rather than manipulation. As we finished our coffee and prepared for the day ahead, I glanced around my restored office. The space Vivian had tried to claim, the work she had tried to undermine, the home she had tried to steal. All still intact, all growing stronger, through the deliberate, thoughtful reclamation we'd undertaken together. Whatever her letter might contain, whatever the future might hold, one certainty remained. Vivian Parker had failed in her ultimate goal. She had not destroyed our marriage or stolen my inheritance. Instead, her intrusion had forced us to examine weaknesses we might otherwise have ignored, to build stronger foundations where cracks had formed, to appreciate what we had nearly lost. The letter arrived 3 days later, a plain envelope with prison markings and Vivian's neat handwriting. Daniel held it for a long moment before opening it, his expression a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Do you want privacy? I offered, ready to leave the room if he needed space to process whatever his mother had written. He shook his head. No secrets, remember? Besides, knowing my mother, this concerns you as much as me. The letter was brief, written on standard issue paper. Daniel and Rachel, if she's reading this too, my counselor suggests I begin with a clear acknowledgement of wrongdoing. So here it is. I planned and executed a deliberate scheme to gain control of Rachel's inheritance through manipulation and deception. I exploited my son's trust, attempted to damage my daughter-in-law's reputation and mental health, and violated the sanctity of your home. These actions were inexcusable regardless of my financial circumstances or the pressure I was under. That said, I want you both to understand that my actions stemmed from genuine desperation rather than malice. The gambling addiction progressed so gradually that I didn't recognize its severity until I was already deeply in debt to dangerous people. By the time I arrived at your home, I was operating under threats that felt very real and immediate. This is not offered as justification, merely context. The counselor here is helping me understand how my choices at each stage reflected lifelong patterns of controlling behavior and inability to seek appropriate help. These patterns damaged my relationship with Henry and ultimately led to the current situation with both of you. Daniel, I recognize that I've betrayed your trust in fundamental ways that may be irreparable. I understand if you choose to sever contact permanently. If, however, you are willing to maintain some form of communication during my incarceration, I would welcome the opportunity to work toward a healthier relationship under the supervision of my counselor. Rachel, I doubt you have any interest in a relationship with me after what I've done, and I wouldn't presume to ask for forgiveness. I will say, however, that the house I tried to take from you is clearly where you belong. The connection you feel to it isn't irrational as I claimed. It's a cornerstone of your identity that I failed to respect. I will accept whatever boundaries you both choose to establish going forward. Vivian Daniel set the letter down carefully, his expression unreadable. That's not what I expected. What did you expect? I asked gently. More manipulation, guilt trips, subtle blame shifting. He shook his head slowly. This seems almost genuine. I considered the letter again, analyzing its tone and content. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing is clear. But notice she still frames everything in terms of her desperation and the threats against her, still positioning herself as responding to circumstances rather than creating them. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Classic mom, admitting fault but with an asterisk. Still, it's more accountability than I've ever heard from her. Prison counseling might be having a genuine effect, I suggested. Or she might be following a script she thinks will eventually get her what she wants. Probably both, Daniel said with a sad smile. The question is what we do with this. The question is what we do with this. It was a complex question without easy answers. Vivian had caused profound damage, yet she was still Daniel's mother, still a person with the theoretical capacity for growth and change. The letter represented a potential opening, though whether toward healing or further manipulation remained uncertain. We don't have to decide immediately, I reminded him. We can take time to process this, discuss it with our own counselor. Daniel and I had been seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma, working through the aftermath of Vivian's invasion both individually and as a couple. The professional guidance had been invaluable in navigating the complex emotions and rebuilding trust between us. I think I want to respond, Daniel said after consideration. Not with promises of reconciliation, but acknowledging that I've received her letter and am processing it, maintaining boundaries while not closing the door completely. The measured approach reflected his growth, neither rejecting communication outright from fear nor rushing toward forgiveness from obligation. He was finding his own path through the complicated landscape of family bonds damaged by betrayal. That sounds healthy, I agreed, and it leaves space for you to decide how much contact feels right as time passes. What about you? He asked. Do you want any contact with her? I considered the question seriously, examining my own feelings about the woman who had nearly destroyed everything I valued. Not now, I said finally. Maybe not ever, but I won't stand in the way of whatever relationship you choose to maintain or rebuild with appropriate boundaries. Daniel nodded, accepting my position without pressure for a different answer. Thank you for that, for understanding that it's complicated for me, even after everything she did. We spent that evening crafting Daniel's response letter, straightforward, boundary establishing, but not permanently severing contact. It acknowledged receipt of Vivian's letter, expressed appreciation for her acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but made clear that any potential relationship moving forward would require consistent demonstration of changed behavior over time. As we sealed the envelope, I reflected on how far we'd come since those first disorienting days of Vivian's arrival. The woman who had invaded our home had inadvertently forced us to strengthen our marriage in ways that might otherwise have taken years to develop, creating clearer communication, stronger boundaries, and deeper understanding of each other's needs. 1 year to the day after Vivian's unexpected arrival, we held a house blessing ceremony, a ritual of reclamation attended by friends who had supported us throughout the ordeal. Megan and Jason were there, along with neighbors who had learned the truth about Vivian's manipulations and rallied around us during the recovery process. We moved from room to room, burning sage and sharing intentions for the space. In my office, I spoke of creativity and professional integrity. In the kitchen, Daniel emphasized nourishment and honest communication. In the memorial room we'd created from the former guest space, we honored family legacies and the importance of remembering where we came from. This house has weathered its own kind of storm, I told our gathered friends as we completed the ritual. Like the people who live in it, it's proven stronger than the forces that tried to claim it. After our guests departed, Daniel and I sat on the back porch swing, watching lightning bugs illuminate the garden where my mother's roses continued their seasonal cycle of growth, dormancy, and renewal. I found something while organizing. The attic today, Daniel said, reaching into his pocket. I was going to wait, but this feels like the right moment. He handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature house crafted in intricate detail. It was your mother's, he explained. There was a note with it saying she bought it the day they closed on this house, as a reminder that home isn't just a place but a feeling they created together. Tears welled in my eyes as I examined the tiny silver house, imagining my mother wearing it while building the life that had eventually created the legacy I'd fought so hard to protect. "Help me put it on?" I asked, extending my wrist. As Daniel fastened the bracelet, the simple gesture felt symbolic of our journey, preserving what mattered from the past while creating something new together, honoring history without being imprisoned by it. "To home," I said softly, touching the charm. "Not just the structure, but what we create within it." "To home," Daniel agreed, his hand finding mine in the gathering darkness. "And to everything Vivian couldn't take from us, no matter how hard she tried." In the distance, a summer storm was brewing, lightning occasionally illuminating the horizon. But our house stood solid and welcoming around us, a sanctuary reclaimed and strengthened by the very forces that had threatened to destroy it. Vivian, Parker had moved into our home without permission, bringing destruction and betrayal that had nearly cost us everything. What I found in her suitcase had indeed changed everything, not in the way she intended, but in ways that ultimately reinforced, rather than undermined the foundations of our life together. The house remained where it had always belonged, in our care, in our hearts, in the legacy that continued despite all attempts to erase it. The home we'd reclaimed was stronger for having been tested, more precious for having been nearly lost, more authentically ours for having been deliberately chosen again. And in that quiet moment of appreciation, as thunder rumbled in the distance and roses nodded in the evening breeze, I knew with absolute certainty that we had won the battle Vivian never should have started, not just for possession of a house, but for the sanctity of home itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.